Chapter 653. Wu Qi stamped his foot and agreed to He Mo's offer. He would exchange the blood essence and souls of 10 people for the release of 1 person from the Black Celestial Forbidden Curse. He would carry out a large-scale blood sacrifice to satisfy He Mo's appetite, so that all the emperors and courtiers of Great Yen could be freed from the deadly curse. The possessed baby chuckled, rubbed his hands satisfyingly, and nodded delightfully, agreeing with Ji Hao's plan. Wu Qi was very generous, and He Mo thought he was a straightforward man. Although he had a contract with King Yangshan that once someone broke the curse for the imprisoned person, that person's soul would become his, Lao Ai's, possession. But, since the souls of these people actually belonged to him, it was a good deal to exchange the soul and blood essence of 10 people for the soul of 1 person. He Mo suddenly cried out as he wagged his finger. He solemnly reminded Wu Qi that the condition just now had a supplementary clause. If the person imprisoned by the Black Celestial Forbidden Curse was a mortal, then the blood essence and souls of 10 mortals could be exchanged for his freedom. But, if the imprisoned person was a cultivator, then the blood essence and souls of 10 cultivators with the same cultivation base would be needed to break the curse. Logically speaking, if the imprisoned person had the cultivation base of a heaven immortal, then the blood essence and souls of 10 heaven immortals would be needed to free him from He Mo's control. He Mo's little face twitched as he stared at Wu Qi and said, "The condition is fair and reasonable, isn't it?" Glaring angrily at He Mo, Wu Qi clenched his teeth and agreed to the condition. Fortunately, among the members of Great Yan's imperial clan and many civil and military officials, there were not many who had broken through the realm of heaven immortals. Only Yen Dan, Sun Quang, Su Qin, Mod, and a few other important ministers had made the breakthrough, while the rest were still far from the realm of heaven immortals. As a general of Diyu, Wu Qi alone had imprisoned hundreds of immortals in the dungeon of East Sea City. It was more than enough to exchange them for the freedom of Yen Dan and others. As for the lives of ordinary mortals, they were also easy to obtain. When the Great Yu army wiped out a colony of itinerant cultivators, all their servants and maids would be banished to slavery. Or, when they encountered some tyrannical generals, all the servants would be killed on the spot. An accomplished itinerant cultivator often had more than 10,000 mortal servants under his command. Now, tens of thousands of itinerant cultivators were killed every day on Pangu continent, and the number of mortals who were implicated in the war was more than hundreds of millions. Seeing Wu Qi gritting his teeth and agreeing, Lao Ai laughed so hard that his saliva even spurted out from his mouth. While giggling, faint black ripples spread out from his body. He casually pointed a finger at a scouting officer standing in a corner of the hall, and with a cry of surprise, he leaped into the air. Lao Ai changed his hand incantation gesture and murmured an incantation under his breath. All of a sudden, a sheet of black light burst out from the top of the scouting officer's head, within which a soul could be vaguely seen. Countless black threads of light darted out from the soul, and in a blink of an eye, the man's soul became transparent and bright, without any impurities. Clapping his hands, Lao Ai smiled and said, "Here is the sample. All the restrictive spells have been removed, and there is no longer any obstruction. Hee, prepare the offerings, I mean what I say." After a brief moment of pondering, Lao Ai nodded and said, "If you can offer me enough offerings, I will teach you the Sutra Divine Scripture." Wu Qi looked at Lao Ai with a puzzled expression. Looking at Wu Qi's surprised look, Lao Ai breathed a deep sigh and said, "The Sutra Divine Scripture is indeed an ancient mystic technique, but it is different from my own cultivation path. It refines one's divine soul with all kinds of murderous aura, and it is the orthodox great Tao of ancient fiends. But I belong to, since I am not from the same clan as the owner of the Sutra Divine Scripture, I can't cultivate it." Rubbing his fingers quickly, Lao Ai chuckled and said, "Give me enough benefits, and the Sutra Divine Scripture will be waiting for you. Look at the Black Celestial Forbidden Spell. Such a powerful restrictive spell is just an insignificant restrictive spell. As long as you offer me more blood sacrifices, perhaps I will teach you all of the Sutra Divine Scripture." Wu Qi looked at Lao Ai's sneaky and unreliable smile, and for some reason, he suddenly thought of the term devil's temptation. He found it strange that King Yangshan and King Yangqiu had given him too few offerings. The Sutra Divine Scripture was a cultivation technique of an ancient innate fiend god, and it was extremely precious. Why did he only teach King Yangshan the black celestial forbidden spell? There was something strange about it, something very, very strange. As Wu Qi did not know Lao Ai's character, he dared not to agree to his condition. While trying to change the topic, Wu Qi and Lao Ai agreed on a rough time for the blood sacrifice. It would take Wu Qi a few months to take Yandan and the others to Pangu continent. Once there, he would have enough offerings to offer to Lao Ai, which would be enough to satisfy his request. Wu Qi had also decided that during the blood sacrifice, he would make Lao Ai swear an oath with his life that he would not tell King Yangqiu about Wu Qi. Otherwise, Wu Qi would be in great trouble. But now it seemed that Lao Ai was a creature from another domain who only cared about profit. As long as he was given enough benefits, he should keep the secret for Wu Qi. In a few words, the two of them agreed on all kinds of details. Lao Ai laughed proudly a few times. He waved his hand and was about to leave. It took a lot of effort for creatures from another domain like him to break through the void and come to this world. Since he could not receive any offerings today, he was not interested in staying here any longer. Lao Ai had just extracted the souls of a few palace maids and the baby, but it was only enough for Lao Ai to make ends meet. If he continued to stay, Lao Ai would probably suffer a loss this time. The strange smile on the baby's face gradually disappeared, and his dark, bottomless eyes slowly returned to normal. Right at this moment, a long howl rang out from the hall. Sun Kuang, Han Fei, and Mod, who were immobilized by the bizarre aura emanated by Lao Ai, leaped to their feet at the same time. The immortal force around their bodies surged, and a large amount of spiritual light faintly gushed out from the top of their heads. Sun Kuang's eyes shone with a divine gleam that shot towards Lao Ai like a thunderbolt. Lao Ai, who was slowly leaving this world and returning to the outland, paused for a moment. The baby's eyes gradually turned pitch black, like obsidian, and a strange aura spread out from his body again. Lao Ai stopped and said with a deep smile, "What's going on? Are they dissatisfied with me? Or are they dissatisfied with my high price?" Hayamo gave Wu Qi a fierce glare and said with a cold grin, "I'll tell you the ugly truth. We've agreed on the terms. If you don't give me enough offerings, I don't mind killing everyone here and harvesting their souls." Lao Ai raised a finger and said sternly, "No one dares to go back on their word. No one dares." Shrouded in an immortal light, Sun Kuang strode to Wu Qi's side and snapped, "You killed 10 people just for me? I don't want to do such a thing." Glaring fiercely at Lao Ai, Sun Kuang turned to Wu Qi and said, "There's no room for negotiation. I'd rather have my soul destroyed than do such an evil act." Mod and Han Fei did not say a word, but it was obvious that they and Sun Kuang had the same intention. The bizarre aura emanating from Lao Ai just now had suppressed their ability to move, so they could not voice their opinions. When Lao Ai was about to leave this world, they finally regained the strength to struggle, and only then did they suddenly rise up to oppose the agreement reached between Wu Qi and Lao Ai. Wu Qi's face darkened as he looked helplessly at Sun Kuang and the other two. Lao Ai was grinning coldly from the side. He purposely let everyone in the hall hear his low murmur, "You're not willing to have your soul destroyed? You'll have to be willing to have your soul destroyed first. Anyway, we've agreed on the terms. 1 person, 10 lives. Heh, I don't care if you're willing or not. Isn't that right, little fella? I think you're more reasonable than me." Helpless, Wu Qi turned to look at Yandan. Lao Ai burst into laughter and pointed a finger at Yandan. Yandan, who had been lying limply on the ground, slowly rose to his feet and regained his ability to move and speak. Yandan's face was a little unsightly. In Yandan's mind, it did not matter if he could gain his freedom by sacrificing some people. But Sun Kuang, Han Fei, and Mod were the true core ministers of Great Yen. Their reaction made Yandan hesitate and unable to speak. Wu Qi did not know what to say. Sun Quan and the other two were so adamant in opposing the use of blood sacrifice in exchange for their lives. Perhaps it was because they were obsessed with moral purity? But, judging from the expressions of the others in the hall, they did not seem to agree with it. Qin Wuyang's expression was even weirder. He looked as if he could not wait to kill 10 cultivators of the same cultivation base as him so that he could transcend himself as soon as possible. The atmosphere in the hall had become extremely bizarre. At this moment, the emperor and his ministers of Great Yen seemed to be divided. Yen Dan's face grew more and more unsightly. He looked helplessly at Wu Qi, hoping that Wu Qi could come up with a suitable solution. Lao Ai, on the other hand, was just grinning coldly. The bizarre black light in his eyes began to spin slowly like a black hole that could devour everything. Wu Qi was silent for a long time. He looked at Sun Quan and the other two, but they were standing there firmly, their expressions unchanged. Feeling helpless, Wu Qi could only give Lao Ai a wry smile and say, "Apart from human lives, what else can I offer as a condition of trade?" Shaking his head, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "It's not difficult for me to kill a few immortals and a group of cultivators in exchange, but I really respect these 3 old misters. However, I really respect these 3 old gentlemen. If they can't accept these conditions, I'm afraid." Lao Ai snorted coldly with a gloomy face and said, "What if I kill everyone here? Won't they accept the condition?" Wu Qi smiled faintly. A faint aura that belonged to Lei Meng spread from his body as he said, "If that's the case, we can only fight to the death, right? It seems that as long as I pay a great price, wars can break out between the ghosts and deities of the outer domains. And this kind of war is not rare, is it?" Lei Meng's aura startled Lao Ai. He gave Wu Qi a horrified look, bowed his head, and pondered for a long time before nodding slowly. "A huge amount of natural treasures. A huge amount of natural treasures produced in this world of yours. Don't try to fool me with ordinary things. You must give me good materials that I can use to craft weapons. Don't try to fool me with ordinary things. I'm afraid you don't want something else." Lao Ai offered a new condition, and Wu Qi hastily agreed. The expressions of Sun Quan and the others suddenly relaxed, and even Yen Dan smiled happily. Chapter 654. Perhaps, when those Frankenstein who unleashed the terrible beast of nuclear weapons on Earth saw the first nuclear bomb explode in the wilderness, their thoughts were exactly the same as Wu Qi's today. "Are you robbing us?" Finally, it was Chu Ping who let out a long, trembling roar, speaking out the thoughts that were in the minds of most of the people present. Ma Yi's face suddenly turned extremely strange, while Wu Qi burst out laughing. With a teleportation, he had arrived in the great meeting hall of the Imperial Palace. The letter of credence simply asked one question: "Are you interested in the method to dispel the Black Celestial Forbidden Curse?" The emperors of the 6 dynasties were exchanging glances with each other, and the strange smiles on their faces sent a chill down one's spine. Puffing out his chest, Wu Qi faced the pressure from these heroes of the 6 dynasties head-on, glancing around fearlessly and nodding at everyone. Apart from Yen Dan, the other emperors of the 5 dynasties stared at Wu Qi as if they were looking at a ghost, especially Ying Zheng and Wei Wuji, who wished they could draw their swords and hack Wu Qi to death. The emperors of the 6 dynasties sat in a row on the cloud platform in front of them, while the famous ministers of the 6 dynasties filled the spacious hall. Everyone had their eyes fixed on Wu Qi, who had suddenly appeared. The air in the hall was almost frozen, as if it had been compressed into an iron plate, pressing down heavily on everyone's heart. Could Wu Qi really dispel the Black Celestial Forbidden Curse, a vicious thing that could wake the emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties from nightmares from time to time? It was as if Lao Ai did not see the bitter expression on Wu Qi and others' faces. With a straight face, he listed out the number of rare and precious materials, as well as the number of materials that could be used to replace the curse, and then went home happily, leaving behind a shriveled body of a baby. Before leaving, Lao Ai also kindly reminded Wu Qi and others that if they could find 3 to 5 innate spirit treasures, he could make an exception and free the emperor and ministers of Great Yen. Upon hearing Lao Ai's last reminder, Wu Qi and others were so angry that they almost coughed up blood. 3 to 5 connate spiritual treasures? In the current world of cultivators, there were very few innate treasures. It was already a great fortune for Wu Qi to gather all the innate energies he needed to cultivate the scroll of stealing. What he needed was just innate energies, not innate treasures that had taken shape. Innate spirit treasures were spirit treasures condensed from innate energy and evolved by the heaven and earth. Ordinary people had never seen them before, yet Lao Ai needed 3 to 5 innate spirit treasures to release the emperor and his ministers. Only by seeing millions of soldiers who had practiced the cultivation methods of the human race gathered together could one truly understand what was called a flood that could destroy everything. Wu Qi found it hard to imagine what kind of terrifying flood beasts they would become when the armies of the 6 dynasties reached the realm of heaven immortals by cultivating cultivation techniques like the true body of heaven and earth scripture. Because of the obstruction of Sun Kuang and the other 2 old men, Wu Qi had to change the terms of the deal with Lao Ai, exchanging a huge amount of natural treasures for everyone's freedom. Because it was Wu Qi who had cast the restrictive spell, the little palace girl's soul was not included in the agreement between Lao Ai and King Yangshan. Therefore, when Wu Qi broke the restrictive spell, Lao Ai did not come out to disturb the situation. Only when the restrictive spell in the souls of those imprisoned by King Yangshan was broken would Lao Ai rush out excitedly. They all thought that they were heroes of their time, and the people around them from other dynasties were people with similar reputations and abilities to themselves. Over 2,000 years ago, they had fought each other to the death just to fight for a little territory. So why bother? Even when these emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties looked at the people sitting next to them, they could not help but feel a very nasty sense of excitement. After a quarter of an hour of silence, Tianwen, the emperor of Great Qi, asked slowly, "What are your terms?" Seeing that the 6 states had agreed to his request, Wu Qi smiled and put up another finger. The 6 states will sign the Treaty of Eternal Alliance and become a brotherhood. We will go to Pangu continent together to manage our territory, help each other, and advance and retreat together. I believe you all know what kind of place Pangu continent is. Without a strong help, do you have the confidence to open up a world on it? Slowly, Wu Qi put forward the terms of the deal between him and Lao Ai, and the entire great hall fell into an awkward silence. Without saying a word, Wu Qi pulled out the little palace-made soul and easily broke the restrictive spell he had set up using the spell-dispelling technique. Apart from the emperor and ministers of Great Yen, the emperors and ministers of the other 5 dynasties sighed with complicated expressions on their faces, especially those from Deqin and Chu Xiang, who had a grudge against Wu Qi. They were sizing Wu Qi up and down with strange expressions. The faces of the generals of Chu Xiang clan flickered between blue and white, and the changes were very interesting. Instead of fighting to the death in a shabby place like Outer Heavenly Realms, they might as well join hands and go to Pangu continent to rob and have fun. Laughing strangely, Yingzheng lightly tapped the table in front of him and said with a cold snort, "Very well, an alliance of 6 dynasties. Very well, I think it is a very good proposal. But we can't be an eternal alliance." After pondering for a brief moment, Yingzheng smiled at the other 5 emperors and said, "When we unify Pangu continent and conquer the celestial court, our alliance will be automatically nullified, and the 6 dynasties will have a real battle. What do you say?" The only way now was to gather the astronomical amount of rare and precious materials needed by Lao Ai, and use them to exchange for the freedom of Yen Dan and the others. After a quarter of an hour of discussion between the emperors and ministers of Great Yen, after some advice from Wu Qi, Yen Dan resolutely sent a formal letter of credence to Yingzheng and the other emperors, inviting them to the imperial palace for a meeting. In that case, please go back and check your storerooms, and see how many treasures you still have in storage. Then he pointed his finger out. Amidst the group of palace girls serving behind the emperors, a petite and beautiful little palace girl screamed and flew up into the sky, hovering in front of Wu Qi. Then, Wu Qi slapped the little palace girl on the forehead and pulled out her soul in front of everyone. After that, countless wisps of black smoke swirled around Wu Qi's fingertips, which he condensed into thin threads and turned into long needles, then carefully pierced into the little palace girl's soul. Even on Panga continent, a first-grade upper province like Zhong province, which was a fertile land with a flourishing population, Wu Qi had never seen millions of soldiers who practiced the cultivation techniques of the human race gathered together. Even the main force of the Annihilation Army, led by Bo Yunting, was only 100,000 soldiers. The ghosts and deities from the outer heavenly realms, including Lei Meng, were only interested in the souls and flesh of the living beings on Pangu continent. But Lao Ai was a complete freak among them. He demanded a huge amount of natural treasures, and he could even use them as a substitute for blood sacrifice. His condition made Wu Qi and the others breathe a sigh of relief. It was the best choice, a condition that everyone could accept. After a quarter of an hour, Wu Qi slapped the little palace girl's soul back into her body. One after another, the emperors and courtiers of the 6 states rushed forward to examine the condition of the little palace girl's soul. Before long, they had finished examining the inside and outside of the little palace girl's soul. Ying Zheng gritted his teeth and growled in a low voice, "It is indeed that vicious restrictive spell. Wu Qi, can you break it?" As long as the black celestial forbidden curse was removed, these heroes of the 6 states would be freed from the last layer of imprisonment. As Wu Qi and the others had calculated, in less than half a month, the emperors of the 5 states, Ying Zheng, Wei Wuji, Zhao Sheng, Tian Wen, and Chu Ping, arrived at Great Yan's imperial palace with their courtiers and generals at their fastest speed. On top of that, because of the grudges between the dynasties, fearing that they would be set up by Yen Dan, Ying Zheng and the other emperors had brought at least 1 million soldiers with them. Without exception, all the soldiers they brought had practiced the body-tempering technique of the human race, and some of the generals had even practiced the mystic arts of the Directorate of Celestials. The emperors and courtiers of the 6 states clapped and laughed in unison, praising Ying Zheng's statement, which had struck right into their hearts. Looking at the laughter of the crowd, Wu Qi put forward the 3rd condition with a twisted face. The generals who led these armies were Baiqi, Yu Yi, Tian Dan, Xiang Yu, Li Xian, Wang Jian, and many others, who made one's scalp go numb just by thinking of them. And because of Wu Qi, these generals were going to have their last shackle removed. Unlike other ghosts and deities from outer heavenly realms, Lao Ai, this eccentric fellow, had a great love for all kinds of precious materials produced in Pangu world. The reason why he taught the Black Celestial Forbidden Curse to King Yangshan was that King Yangshan had once presented him with a batch of extremely precious materials. With those materials, Lao Ai had forged a natal weapon and used it to kill an old enemy. These were millions of giant beasts locked in cages, just waiting for the moment to be released. The emperors and courtiers of the 6 states were all wise men, so they could naturally tell whether Wu Qi's proposal was good or bad. Forming an alliance of the 6 states would bring them great benefits, so they had no need to oppose Wu Qi's proposal. Of course, the detailed terms of the 6 nations alliance still needed to be carefully discussed. To what extent should they help each other and advance and retreat together? To what extent should they go? To what extent should they pay? How should they ensure the common and individual interests of the 6 nations? All of these details needed to be discussed in detail. Standing on the wall of Great Yan's imperial palace, Wu Qi took a deep cold breath as he looked out at the military camps that stretched for hundreds of miles outside Ji City. He was so excited that his whole body was numb and his internal organs were trembling. His heart had been beating intensely. Now that he had made a great improvement in his cultivation, he felt that what he would do today would change the entire Pangu world. The emperors and courtiers of the other 5 states exchanged glances and agreed at the same time. While Wu Qi was lost in his reverie, the sound of steady footsteps rang out. Ma Yi, clad in a red official robe and with a large blade hanging from his waist, strode up the wall. He bowed to Wu Qi and said in a deep and powerful voice, "Duke of Tian, His Majesty and the emperors of the 6 states are waiting for you in the Great Hall." Wu Qi smiled faintly, then raised a finger and said, "The first condition is for the 6 states to confer me the title of king. All the courtiers of the 6 states respect me, and if I have any request, all the courtiers and generals of the 6 states will do their best to help me. Of course, if there is anything that the 6 states need, I, Wu Qi, will do my best to help as long as it is within my ability. But the price that Lao AI offered made Wu Qi feel dizzy. As he failed to get the sacrifice of blood sacrifice, Lao AI asked for a huge price, which was almost like a lion opening its mouth. The huge amount nearly drove Yen Dan and the other emperors and courtiers of Great Yen crazy. It would take almost 20,000 secret vaults that Great Yen had accumulated over 2,000 years to barely meet the needs of all the people who were trapped by the Black Celestial Forbidden Curse. An army of millions was stationed outside G City, and the military camps that stretched for hundreds of miles were lined with flags fluttering in the wind. The soldiers of various states were showing off their prowess to each other. The sound of drums and horns towered into the sky, and the battle cries of the soldiers when they were drilling shattered the clouds in the sky. Occasionally, when Chi-Chi was shouting and stamping his feet, the wall of G City would tremble violently, and even the wall that was protected by countless layers of defensive spells would crack open. This time, without too much hesitation, the emperors and courtiers of the various states agreed to the condition. Pangu continent was vast and boundless, and all the powers here were extremely powerful. Compared to them, the 6 states were still too weak. An alliance of 6 states? It was an imaginative proposal. The grudge between the 6 states was nothing more than a trivial matter of 2,000 years ago, and Wu Qi had already helped them break the restrictive spells. So, why should they still care about what happened in the past? Wu Qi could not help but laugh in his mind. It seemed that the emperors of the 6 states had all sent their capable men to Pangu continent, and they had all reaped great rewards in just a few years. Especially the few civil officials around Chu Ping, the obscure and mysterious energy ripples emanating from them told Wu Qi that they had all received the teachings of the Directorate of Celestials, and their cultivation bases were not weak at all. It was impossible for them to do that. Even if they found an innate spirit treasure, they could not give it to Lao AI. The treasures that Great Yen had painstakingly accumulated over 2,000 years could only be found in one secret vault. On the other hand, the number of natural treasures that Lao AI had proposed was equivalent to the entire inventory of 20,000 secret vaults of Great Yen. Even Wu Qi could not help but feel dizzy when he heard Lao AI's condition, and he nearly fainted to the ground. This guy is taking revenge on us. He is definitely doing it on purpose. Yen Dan nodded with a smile. This was the condition that Wu Qi had proposed during the discussion between the emperors and courtiers of Great Yen. There was no way that Wu Qi would give such a great benefit to the people of the 6 states for no reason. It was nothing more than being conferred the title of king by the 6 states. Loud and sonorous battle cries kept coming from outside the city. The soldiers of the 6 states, who were extremely energetic and could not calm down for even a moment, were drilling themselves crazily, using the cruelest means to improve their overall strength. The whole G City was shaking, and even the entire planet was shaking because of their crazy actions. Wu Qi could even hear the planet groaning under his feet as if it could not bear the heavy load. Chu Ping held the little palace girl's soul in his hand, carefully examining it with the mystic technique of ghosts and deities that he had cultivated. After a full 15 minutes, Chu Ping nodded his head with a mixture of sadness and joy. Clenching his teeth, he breathed out a long sigh and said, "Sure enough, the restrictive spell has been completely broken. It will be very interesting." Wu Qi murmured to himself, "It will be very interesting." Now, the heroes of the 6 states could actually join hands to fight against an enemy? Instead of fighting against each other, they could join hands to fight against an outsider? They could even join hands to fight against an outsider? At the thought of that wonderful scene, the emperors and courtiers of the 6 states almost burst out laughing. Wu Qi patted Ma Yi's shoulder smilingly and said in a low voice, "When everything is settled, why don't you start cultivating Lao AI's great sun magic?" For a man like Ying Zheng, it was better to form an alliance for fun first. If they really wanted to continue fighting against each other, it would not be too late for them to settle the scores in the past when all 6 emperors here had become mighty figures like the Celestial Emperor of the Celestial Court. Before one's overall strength was strong enough, it was also the right thing to do to find a few reliable allies to support and help each other. Chapter 655. The front hall of Great Yan's imperial palace was ablaze with lights and voices. The emperors and courtiers of the 6 states were cheering and drinking. Hundreds of beautiful dancers were dancing in the hall like heavenly fiends, and the melodious music drifted out of the city with the wind, reaching dozens of miles away. The barracks outside the city were also ablaze with candlelight, illuminating half of the sky. Millions of soldiers of the 6 states were drinking and feasting, and countless beautiful girls were shuttling back and forth in the barracks, having a night with the soldiers who were in high spirits. After 7 days and 7 nights of hard work, the emperors and courtiers of the 6 states reached a formal treaty of alliance. After signing their names on the treaty and stamping it with their seals, the emperors and courtiers of the 6 states killed white horses, burned the treaty, and prayed to the heaven and earth. The 6 states officially became brothers. There were hundreds of detailed rules to the treaty, and it was difficult to understand all of them. However, the emperors and ministers of the 6 states were extremely satisfied with the treaty. The treaty took into account the overall interests of the 6 states and the interests of individual states. It was fair and open, and there were no loopholes. At the same time, the 6 states built earthen platforms at the same time and worshipped Wu Qi as their king. With the title of nobility that Great Yan had conferred upon Wu Qi, the emperors of the 6 states worshipped him as the king of Tianyun of their states, and declared that he was superior to the civil and military officials of the 6 states, and had the power to supervise and instruct the courtiers of the 6 states. In the past, Wu Qi had the power of the 6 states with the seal of prime minister, but today, Wu Qi was conferred the title of king of the 6 states, which was even more glorious than him. The treaty was signed, and the ceremony of conferring came to an end. The emperors and courtiers of the 6 states feasted to celebrate. After a night of merrymaking, the 6 states would gather their soldiers, gather all kinds of belongings, and follow Wu Qi to Panga continent, the magnificent and magical fertile land, to start a business. With the hope of breaking the black celestial forbidden curse, the people of the 6 states were relaxed. They were just waiting to go to Panga continent and do something big. That incomparably vast hot land, those innumerable people, those endless treasures, such a mystical world, everything was possible. Therefore, the emperors and courtiers of the 6 states feasted to their heart's content. Fine wine flowed into their stomachs like flowing water. Even though many of them had cultivated to the heaven immortal realm, such unbridled drinking made them drunk in no time. Even Yingjing, a man with a deep and dignified demeanor, had begun to indulge in debauchery. Holding a wine jar in one hand and embracing a beautiful girl in the other, he began to have wild fun. His joyful laughter echoed out from the grand hall and even spread far away. The unprecedented sense of relaxation made everyone indulge themselves that night. Even MOD was about 70 to 80% drunk. He held a long sword and danced with it in the square in front of the hall. The piercingly cold sword energy soared into the sky. The sword energy pierced through the clouds and shattered the clouds in the sky. The cyan sword light even covered the moonlight in the sky. MOD danced with his sword, Sun Kuang recited poems, Han Fei was stammering and arguing with Lin Xiangru about whose alcohol tolerance was worse, Fan Yuqi and Lian Po were wrestling and frolicking in a corner of the hall, while Jing Ku and Hu Hai were laughing and joking with each other. The grand hall was in a complete mess. The front half of Great Yan's imperial palace was in a mess. The emperors and courtiers of the 6 states were venting the pressure that had accumulated in their hearts for over 2,000 years. But, in the back half of the imperial palace, in the Forbidden Palace, Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu were sitting in a quiet chamber, studying a thumb-sized black pearl floating in front of them. The pearl was the treasure Wu Qi took out from the outer dimension Great Void Formation. It was this pearl that shattered the dimensional blades that shot out from the formation, using the shattered dimensional forces to give birth to 360 unformed grand white spatial breaching pearls of innate energies, which eventually gave birth to the innate silver lotus. The pearl hovered quietly in front of Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu. The cyan candlelight in the quiet chamber sprinkled onto its pitch-black surface, coating it with a layer of rippling light that looked like the surface of water. Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu examined the pearl with their divine will. It seemed to be extremely quiet, but in fact, it was performing spatial jumps at a frightening high frequency. In the blink of an eye, the orb would disappear and reappear 1.8 billion times in its original position. This frightening high-frequency vibration had torn apart the divine will of Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu a few times. If not for the strange cultivation technique they were cultivating, and their divine souls had reached the realm of Xiantian, which allowed them to possess all kinds of magical divine abilities, perhaps they would have been severely wounded just by using their divine will to examine the pearl. After a long and arduous effort, Wu Qi's divine will finally carefully entered the pearl and went deep into its core. The interior of the pearl was filled with layers upon layers of extremely dense spatial barriers. The extremely compressed spatial barriers looked like a huge labyrinth. If not for the fact that Wu Qi had obtained an enormous amount of soul source twice in a row and improved his divine soul by many times, his divine will would never be able to walk out of this huge spatial labyrinth and find the true core of the pearl. But as soon as he walked out of the labyrinth formed by the spatial barriers, his divine will came to a vast void. In this boundless void, wave after wave of powerful spatial vibrations were constantly spreading back and forth. Every wave of spatial vibrations was completely different from the previous one. Each wave of spatial vibrations contained a trace of the mysterious and unpredictable laws of space. Occasionally, two waves of spatial vibrations would collide with each other, immediately producing a large number of dimensional blades that flew all over the sky. But once these dimensional blades hit the spatial barriers surrounding the pearl, they would shatter into pieces. Countless tiny, fragmented spatial forces danced wildly in the void, bringing up trillions of extremely fine black lights. In the core of the pearl, there were 3 layers of runes, which were glowing with a strange light, wrapping a small clump of black flame. The flame was beating like a heart. Every time it beat, a new spatial vibration would be generated in the void. As it beat ceaselessly, the number of spatial vibrations in the void grew more and more intense. Princess Zhonglu suddenly let out a cry of surprise. She slightly opened her eyes and gave Wu Qi a meaningful glance. At the moment, Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu had a telepathic connection, so he could understand the meaning of any random action from Princess Zhonglu. She was asking Wu Qi if he had seen through the origin of this flame. Wu Qi nodded slowly, and a joyful smile emerged on his face. He possessed the divine flame of order, an innate divine flame, so how could he not recognize this black flame? Obviously, this was the innate divine flame of void, which was famous for its ability to burn the void and destroy everything that stood in its way. This kind of divine flame was best at destroying all kinds of space restrictions. Although it was not destructive enough to the power of the 5 elements, if there was a formation that specialized in using void restrictions to trap and injure the enemy, this void-burning divine flame would be able to easily break that formation. Ancient immortals liked to use all kinds of methods to distort the void and reverse the time and space to hide their cave abodes, or hide all kinds of secret treasures and scriptures using interstitial void. However, all the restrictive spells related to the void were useless before this divine flame of void. Just like the divine flame of order had the ability to suppress all evil spirits and fiends, the divine flame of void had the same effect on all spatial restrictive spells. The divine flame of void could not even burn through a thin piece of paper, but a single wisp of it was more than enough to pierce through the void for 10,000 miles. Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu exchanged a glance and smiled. No wonder this pearl had such a strange ability. No wonder it could pierce through the void at such a high frequency. Everything could be explained now that a clump of innate divine flame of void was sealed in its core. When they looked at the trapping formation constructed from 3 layers of runes, they found that it was just an ordinary acquired restrictive spell of 5 elements. The divine flame of void could burn the void, but it could not do any harm to the energies of 5 elements. Therefore, this most ordinary restrictive spell of 5 elements had imprisoned the divine flame of void in the pearl, turning it into the power source of the pearl. Presumably, the immortal who crafted this pearl was an absolute grandmaster in artifact crafting. Otherwise, he would not have come up with such a wonderful idea. Both of them stared at each other for a while. Then, a chaotic light burst out from Wu Qi's mouth and nose, while a five-colored divine ray burst out from Princess Zhongli's eyes. Two masses of energies mixed together, and immediately, an endless transformation occurred. The chaos was divided, and the five elements returned to their original form. Abruptly, a small hand about a few inches in size, like the palm of a real human, shot out from the ball of mixed energies, gently grabbing towards the pearl. A faint but clear cry was heard, as a strand of divine flame of void as tiny as a hair was pulled out from the surface of the pearl by the small hand. Not daring to be careless, Wu Qi quickly opened his mouth and sucked the strand of dark flame into his body before the divine flame of void could burn through the surrounding void and escape, fusing it with his chaotic energy. Then, the chaotic energy was quickly injected into the divine flame of void. Silently, Wu Qi exercised the energy condensing technique found in Scroll of Stealing. After consuming a huge amount of chaotic energy, he formed a spark of divine flame of void in his body, just like what he did to the divine flame of order. Following the chaotic energy, the spark kept swimming in Wu Qi's body, and as long as it absorbed enough chaotic energy, it could quickly turn into a monstrous black flame that could burn the void into nothingness. This is a good thing. With this treasure, it will be easy for me to open the door of someone's cave abode in the future. Wu Qi laughed complacently. Although Wu Qi had only extracted a strand of the divine flame of void from the pearl and refined it into a spark, it did not harm the core of the pearl. Therefore, it was still an extraordinary treasure with great power. After pondering for a while, Wu Qi asked Princess Zhonglu for her Five Thunders soul-shattering zither, embedding the pearl deep into its body using the embedding technique. After that, he used some rare materials he plundered during these days to refine the zither. Originally, the Five Thunders soul-shattering zither could only produce the sound of 5 thunders to kill souls. But now, with the addition of the pearl and Wu Qi using all his effort, whenever Princess Zhonglu played the zither, the surrounding void would shatter instantly, and countless energy blades would shoot out to injure the limbs of the enemies. Coupled with the increasingly powerful sound of thunder, it was more than enough to kill immortals whose cultivation base was weaker than Princess Zhonglu in batches. After discovering the secret of this black pearl and obtaining their own benefits, only then did Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu leave the quiet chamber happily. Right after they walked out of the chamber, a few palace maids came to greet them. Lu Qingfeng, the Duke of Yenlu of Great Yen, had been waiting outside for a long time, requesting an audience with Wu Qi. Chapter 656. Inside an abode located at the back garden of Great Yen Imperial Palace, an excited Lu Qingfeng was seen walking around a white jade flower pot with his hands clasped behind his back. Inside the flower pot was a blooming ink stamen begonia. The whirlwind brought up by Lu Qingfeng's fast running was ruffling the blossoms, causing the petals to fall and scatter all over the ground. Meng Xiaobai, Zhang Hu, Hu Wei, Luo Kedi, Ma Liang, and a group of Lu Qingfeng's trusted subordinates were standing off to the side. Their faces were filled with excitement, and they kept craning their necks to peek at the entrance of the abode. Meanwhile, Lu Cun was sitting lazily on a large chair, his shifty eyes peeking at a few pretty palace maids standing in a corner of the abode. All of a sudden, the lights in the abode dimmed for a moment, then came back on. Amidst the whistling of the cold wind, Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu appeared in the abode, hand in hand. Lu Qingfeng and the others did not see how Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu came into the abode. They just felt that there were 2 more people in the abode, and after staring at Wu Qi for a long while, they finally saw the faces of Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu. Lu Qingfeng was overjoyed. He cupped his fist at Wu Qi and said with a smile, "Lu Qingfeng, Duke of Yenlu of Great Yen, offers greetings, Your Highness, Prince of Tianyun of the 6 dynasties." Wu Qi raised his eyebrows, then spun and came behind Lu Qingfeng, thrusting his foot toward his buttocks. Lu Qingfeng let out a strange cry and sprung up into the air. But the speed of Wu Qi's kick was just a little bit faster than his, and the tip of his foot accurately hit Lu Qingfeng's buttocks, throwing him over 30 feet away. Fortunately, Lu Qingfeng's cultivation was quite good. He gently raised his qi and a cloud burst out from under his feet, allowing him to steadily land on the ground. Rolling his eyes, Wu Qi pointed his finger at Lu Chengfeng and scolded with a smile. "If you say those 3 words again, I'll immediately turn hostile and beat you so badly that even your mother won't be able to recognize you. TSK, Prince of Tianyun, is this thing worth it? If I didn't want to take advantage of them, I wouldn't even bother with this title." Lu Chengfeng laughed out loud. He stretched out his arms and embraced Wu Qi. The two of them hugged each other tightly. Today, Wu Qi had the cultivation base of a top-level heaven immortal, while Lu Chengfeng was still a little low-level cultivator. But the two of them were still the same as when they first met. There was not the slightest change, and there was not the slightest unfamiliarity between them. When Meng Xiaobai and the others saw this, they all came forward with smiles on their faces. Wu Qi was still Wu Qi, the Wu Qi they knew, the Wu Qi who called them brothers. In this world, many things could change at any time, but there was a kind of brotherhood. Even if they were separated by thousands of mountains and rivers, even if time flew by, even if the gap between them grew wider and wider, a true brother would always be a brother. No matter what happened, it would never change. Wu Qi and Lu Chengfeng held hands and smiled, while Princess Zhang Le quietly walked to the side and ordered the palace maids to prepare tea and snacks. Princess Zhang Lu was a very clear-headed little woman. Even though everyone else in this abode was her subject, she knew that these people were Wu Qi's brothers, her husband's brothers. Therefore, she seriously and quietly acted as an inconspicuous housewife, preparing everything they needed. In addition to tea and snacks, Princess Zhang Lu also ordered people to prepare wine and delicacies, and even ordered the imperial kitchen to quickly prepare dishes such as roasted lamb and other dishes to go with wine. Judging from the posture of Wu Qi and Lu Chengfeng, they were also going to drink wine and talk about their feelings after parting. As the abode was too small, it was not enough to satisfy their craving. Therefore, Wu Qi and his company came to the back garden, picked a pine forest that was right next to the lake, and built a bonfire, roasting whole sheep, cows, chickens, ducks, geese, rabbits, and many other delicacies that went well with wine. The group of people sat on the ground, with a bright moon hanging over their heads, surrounded by a picturesque scenery. A gentle breeze blew past them, and they were talking and laughing happily, telling each and every interesting story. Ao Buzin, whose body had grown to the size of a bowl, was lying sprawled on the grass by the lakeside. Wu Qi used the back of his head as a pillow for Ao Buzin. Ao Buzin kept grumbling as he held a roasted lamb leg with both hands, munching on it until his face was smeared with oil. Staring at the stars in the sky, Wu Qi slowly told them everything that had happened when he left Myriad Immortals' planet for Pangu continent. Yu Hehuan came to him to seek revenge for the murder of his brother, but in the end he was captured alive by Wu Qi and brought to Pangu continent as a hostage. After that, Yu Zong spent all his wealth to beg the Yu clan of Zhong province to save his son and capture Wu Qi alive to vent his anger. In the end, Wu Qi attracted the thunder punishment of the heavenly tribulation and killed all the soldiers hiding in ambush. But then, Yu Zong struck out suddenly and nearly killed Wu Qi with a palm strike. After that, Beiji's predecessor saved Wu Qi, and the master and disciple took Wu Qi in out of kindness. However, they bumped into Lao Ai and Madman Shui, who were severely wounded, in that tiny temple. Perhaps this was the ill-fated fate between them and Wu Qi? Who would have thought that they would bump into some overlords who wanted to invade the Deep Valley by force? In the end, Wu Qi and Lao Ai invaded Enhe City and took over the power of Euphoria Heavenly Palace. After a painstaking effort and risking his life, Wu Qi finally found the innate yang energy under the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean and successfully formed his Dharma body. At the same time, he plotted against King Zhang Qiu and Patriarch Miao Ying. But in the end, Feng Lingling, the prefecture overseer of Zhong province, nearly had his entire clan slaughtered. Wu Qi also told Lu Chengfeng and others about what he saw with his own eyes, how Feng Lingling, his clan, and all his subordinates were captured by a giant hand out of the void. 2 heads were better than 1. Perhaps, Lu Chengfeng and the others could figure out something that Wu Qi had never thought of. After that, Bo Zhongfu, the new prefecture overseer of Zhong Province, was appointed as the new prefecture overseer of Zhong Province. Yu clan of Zhong Province had reaped a great reward for betraying Feng Lingling, and the number of territories in 30 provinces had stunned Lu Chengfeng and the others. They could never imagine how vast the 30 provinces under the rule of Great Yu dynasty were. When they heard that Wu Qi had helped Yu Mu gain the power of High Province, and that he had acquired a large fief, the East Sea County, on which he had built a city and begun to train a private army, Lu Chengfeng and others burst into cheers, clapping and stamping their feet. The East Sea County alone was a few times larger than the territory of Great Yen on Myriad Immortals planet plus all the vassal kingdoms. Such a vast territory was indeed promising. After a long time and finishing 3 jars of fine wine, Wu Qi told them what he had experienced in the past few years. After that, Lu Chengfeng began to tell them what had happened to them. Compared with Wu Qi's magnificent and even perilous experience, the experience of Lu Chengfeng and others was really nothing to write home about. They had followed Great Yen out of Myriad Immortals planet and found a new planet to settle down on. First, they eradicated the native powers on this planet, and then began to build Great Yan's own foundation. As a member of Great Yen Imperial Clan, Lu Chengfeng was one of the very few who had gone through many trials and tribulations. No matter it was wisdom or talent, he was one of the best. Therefore, not only did he inherit the official position of West Supervisor of Duke Yenlu, he was now also assigned to the military affairs, and played an important role in training the new army of Great Yen dynasty. Although Lu Ziyuan, who was once a foppish young master, still behaved a little dissolute, under Lu Chengfeng's discipline, he had become an increasingly important member of Great Yan's government, just like how he helped Wu Qi manage Star Picking City in those years. Great Yen had deliberately chosen such a planet to settle down, and the native powers on this planet were extremely weak, so they did not pose any threat to Great Yen. As for the rest of the government affairs, they were handled by elite soldiers and strong generals. Therefore, Lu Chengfeng did not have much to tell Wu Qi. The only thing worth mentioning was that Meng Xiaobai, Luo Kadi, Ma Liang, Hu Wei, and Zhang, who were now the generals of the 1st Battalion of the new army. The battalion consisted of more than 15,000 soldiers, and like Qin Qingshui and others, they were now the generals of the new generation of Great Yen. Under the moonlight, the group of hot-blooded men was talking, laughing, crying, and making noise. For a moment, Wu Qi and Lu Chengfeng were talking about Myriad Immortals planet, which was ruined by Patriarch Yuanhua. Apart from cursing, they also lamented the countless people of Great Yen who had died tragically on Myriad Immortals planet. At the same time, they were glad that all the members of Great Yan's imperial clan and powerful clans had evacuated Myriad Immortals planet. Otherwise, the loss alone would be enough to make Great Yen suffer a great deal of pain. When it came to anger, Wu Qi threw his fist into the air and shattered a few boulders by the lake. When it came to happiness, Lu Chengfeng jumped up and waved his hands, throwing his head back and roaring joyfully. Then, the crowd raised their wine jars, cheered, and drank to their heart's content. The joy they felt was indescribable with words. They fooled around for a long time, and when the first ray of dawn appeared on the horizon, Wu Qi suddenly sprung up to his feet. Solemnly, he bowed deeply at Lu Chengfeng and said, "Elder brother, I have something to ask of you." Lu Chengfeng returned the bow with a solemn face and said, "You are my brother. Everything is negotiable." Wu Qi straightened up and said with a smile, "When the people of the 6 dynasties go to Panga continent, I will not allow anyone to meddle in my little territory. At that time, even Yen Bugui's scouting office will have to get out of here and do what they are supposed to do. I will not let them meddle in my territory." Holding Lu Chengfeng's hand, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "I want you to help me, elder brother. No matter how the East Sea County develops, it will always be shared by us brothers." Lu Chengfeng smiled lightly and held Wu Qi's hand tightly. "We are brothers, so there is no need to be so courteous. The East Sea County is our foundation, and naturally, it will be us brothers who will work together to take care of it. Haha, perhaps in the future, we will be independent of the 6 dynasties." Wu Qi chuckled. With a wave of his hand, he produced a large number of storage bags that were stuffed to the brim, and distributed them to Lu Chengfeng and the others. There were all kinds of natural treasures for cultivation in the storage bags, as well as cultivation manuals that Wu Qi had carefully selected for Lu Chengfeng and the others, which were more than enough for them to cultivate to the peak of Heaven Immortal Realm. Lu Chengfeng and the others did not stand on ceremony. They gladly accepted the storage bags and focused on following Wu Qi to Pangu continent. Just then, Ma Yi strode over to them with a few eunuchs. Prince Tianyun, the emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties have come to an agreement. 7 days from now will be the auspicious day, and all 6 dynasties will go to Pangu continent together. Chapter 657. Outside Ji City, the emperors, courtiers, generals, and soldiers of the 6 dynasties, as well as the carefully selected people who were extremely loyal to the 6 dynasties, were standing in countless phalanxes of 10,000 people around Chichi. The total population of the 6 dynasties had exceeded 1 billion. Apart from leaving some members of the imperial clan and generals to guard the territories in outer heavenly realms and slowly develop their national strength, the elites of the 6 dynasties were gathered here, preparing for the expedition to Pangu. 1 billion people were gathered on the plain outside Ji City. It would have been impossible for the 6 dynasties to do this if not for the large number of heaven immortals guarding them today. When the number of people reached 10,000, there was no end to it, but when the number reached 100 million, it was impossible to imagine what a terrible scene it would be when 100 million people lined up on the plain. And here, there were 1 billion people. If the cultivators of the 6 dynasties had not been flying at low altitudes and soothing the people with all kinds of unique spells, the 1 billion people would have fallen into chaos. Even so, when 1 billion people were gathered together, the plain was densely packed with human heads. When they inhaled at the same time, a gust of wind would sweep across the plain, and when they exhaled at the same time, the clouds in the sky would be dispersed by the airflow. As long as they casually stomped their feet, the ground would tremble and dust would fly up into the sky. On the dais, the emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties stood in a row behind Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu. They looked at Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu with complicated looks in their eyes, curious to see how they were going to transport 1 billion people to Pangu continent. The cost of traveling from outer heavenly realms to Pangu continent through a teleportation formation was astronomical. If all 1 billion people were to travel to Pangu continent by normal means, the huge cost would bankrupt the 6 dynasties 10,000 times over. Wu Qi looked at Princess Zhonglu with a smile. His interstitial world was a mass of chaos. Although he could create mountains and hills at his will, it would cost him a lot of energy and mental strength to control them. Princess Zhongli's interstitial world, on the other hand, was a vast expanse of fertile land, enough to accommodate the people in front of him for a short period of time. With a faint smile on her face, Princess Zhonglu slowly raised her hands. Streams of 5-colored divine light flowed out from between her fingers, and the thin curtain of light transformed into an arched gate in front of her. Inside the gate, which was 1,000 feet in both width and length, there were vaguely mountains and rivers, the sun and the moon, flowers and trees, and a boundless beautiful scenery. There was also a dense natural energy spreading out from the gate. The cool and refreshing natural energy sprinkled on the emperors and ministers of the 6 states, making them take a deep breath. Ing Zheng and the others stared at the arched door in horror. Just the natural energy emanating from Princess Zhongli's interstitial world was a few times stronger than that on Myriad Immortals' planet. It was hard to imagine to what extent the natural energy in this interstitial world had reached. In end, the people of Zhonglu and courtiers as were, and were, who were, and of as, and were as, and cour as, and as, young as, and as planets, and as, and as. A 5-colored light poured out of the arched door and quickly enveloped the hundreds of phalanxes of 10,000 soldiers. Then, with a flash of light, the phalanxes disappeared. Sheets of light kept pouring out of the arched door, and countless people on the plain disappeared amidst them. In just a quarter of an hour, All 1 billion people and over 10 million soldiers of the six dynasties had been sucked into Princess Zhongli's interstitial world. A soft voice rang out in Princess Zhongli's interstitial world. The ancient melody had an indescribable, magical charm, and those who were sucked into the interstitial world felt as if they had returned to their childhood, as if their grandmother was singing a lullaby softly in their ears. In the midst of the natural energy, which was so rich that it almost condensed into liquid, 1 billion soldiers and soldiers closed their eyes and fell asleep peacefully. The natural energy slowly seeped into the bodies of these soldiers and soldiers, slowly changing their physiques and aptitudes. Even with the help of Princess Zhongli's almighty divine ability, it would take months to return to Pangu continent from outer heavenly realms. During these months, Princess Zhongli had controlled the interstitial world to improve the postures of these people. When they arrived in the interstitial world, their physiques and aptitudes would be greatly improved. At the very least, the nearly 20 million soldiers of the six dynasties would be able to cultivate the cultivation techniques of the human race much faster. Of course, this kind of adjustment was also targeted. If the soldiers and soldiers of Great Yen could get 100 benefits, then the soldiers and soldiers of the other 5 dynasties could only get 10 benefits at most. Princess Zhongli knew this very well. She had never been a good person. If it had not been for the alliance between the 6 dynasties, in which Wu Qi had cheated the 5 dynasties, not only did Wu Qi distribute all the natural treasures that Great Yen was supposed to offer to Lao Ai to the 5 dynasties, he had also added a lot of fake benefits to them. If both Great Yen and Wu Qi could make a fortune, Princess Zhongli would not be in the mood to help the soldiers and soldiers of the 5 dynasties improve their physiques and aptitudes. But now, since the 5 dynasties had been slaughtered by Wu Qi and had begun to plan the strategy of looting the land as soon as they arrived on Pangu continent, in order to make their looting more efficient, so that Wu Qi and Great Yen could get the benefits faster and offer those natural treasures to Lao Ai as soon as possible, freeing the emperor and courtiers of Great Yen from the control of the Black Celestial Forbidden Curse, Princess Zhongli naturally had to give them some benefits. After the 1 billion soldiers and soldiers were brought into the interstitial world, Princess Zhongli turned to look at the emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties. Apart from the emperors and their most important courtiers and generals, all the members of the imperial clan and the descendants of the powerful clans were sucked into the interstitial world. Out of respect for the emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties, they could not sneak into Pangu continent, but their children and grandchildren would not be given any preferential treatment. Before long, only the emperors and their most important courtiers were left on the earthen platform. There were only a few hundred of them, and they were the group of old men whom King Yangshan had brought to Myriad Immortals' planet, asking them to expand their territory and rebuild the foundation of the 6 dynasties. The emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties glanced at each other with complicated expressions. Then, led by Ying Zheng, they threw their heads back and roared with laughter, followed by the courtiers of the 6 dynasties. With a wave of his hand, a chariot driven by 9 flood dragons soared into the sky. Wu Qi, Princess Zhongli, and all the other people of the 6 dynasties entered the chariot one after another. A beam of black light shot into the sky from outside Ji City, and the emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties quickly flew toward the nearest immortal lord's residence. Inside Ji City, the few kings of Great Yan's imperial clan who stayed in Ji City knelt down solemnly and bowed toward the rapidly disappearing black light in the sky. The future of the 6 dynasties was bleak. They might build an unprecedented foundation on Pangu continent, or they might suffer heavy casualties or even be wiped out. In short, their future was unpredictable, and no one knew when they would meet again. With Wu Qi and Princess Zhongli leading the way, they quickly arrived at Yuhua Heavenly Realm. In the square in front of the immortal abode in Yuhua Immortal City, they stepped into the teleportation formation that would take them to Pangu continent. At the moment, the atmosphere in Yuhua Immortal City was tense, and the atmosphere was extremely strange. The garrisons of the human race and the garrisons of the celestial court were eyeing each other covetously, as if a war would break out at the slightest disagreement. The once bustling Yuhua Immortal City had become sparsely populated. Apart from some cultivators and immortals who were born and bred in the city, as well as some merchants and peddlers who lived in the city for money, not a single living soul could be seen in the vast city. The whole place was deserted like a ghost city. Outside the teleportation formation that led to Pangu continent, the garrisons of the Celestial Court and the garrisons of the human race stood facing each other on opposite sides of the square. There were 3,000 garrisons of the Celestial Court, while the garrisons of the human race had deployed 20,000 soldiers to set up camp in the square. Both sides were extremely nervous about the person who walked out of the teleportation formation. It would be fine if the person who walked out was an immortal or a cultivator, but once it was an ordinary mortal, the battle formation on both sides was thrown into chaos. Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu exchanged a glance. They knew that this was the consequence of their killing of Yu Zong. Yu Zong was in charge of the garrisons of the human race in the thousands of heavenly realms around Yuhua Heavenly Realm, and he was the supreme ruler of the Yu dynasty in Yuhua Heavenly Realm. Now that he was killed by 2 passing immortals, the higher-ups of Yu could not help but wonder if the Celestial Court had done it on purpose. Therefore, the current tense atmosphere in Yuhua Immortal City was brought by Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu. They had just killed Yu Zong casually, but for the higher-ups of Yu, they could not see it that way. Pangu continent was in a mess, and if the Celestial Court took the opportunity to attack the garrisons of the human race in the outer heavenly realms, the consequences would be too severe. That was why the atmosphere was so tense. If there were any mortals coming out of the teleportation formation, there would be a commotion among the people on both sides. The immortal officials of the Celestial Court had to be on guard to see if it was a new general sent by the human race, and if he would launch a retaliatory attack on Yuhua Heavenly Realm. The army of the human race, on the other hand, had to protect their new superior. If the new Marquis of Yuhua Heavenly Realm was killed, how could they explain it to their superiors? Because of such an atmosphere, when Wu Qi and his company walked into the teleportation formation, they were not questioned too much. The few immortal officials in charge of the teleportation formation hurriedly asked Wu Qi and his company to choose the corresponding teleportation formation on Pangu continent, then activated it and sent them away. For these officials of the Celestial Court, it was better for all the unfamiliar cultivators to go to Pangu continent and not stay in Yuhua Immortal City and cause more trouble. At this moment, Yuhua Immortal City was like a huge barrel of gunpowder, and it could be detonated with just a spark. If any passing immortal got into a conflict with the garrisons of the human race here, it was bound to trigger a conflict that would sweep the entire Yuhua Heavenly Realm, and the consequence was something that even Heavenly Lord San Yu, the highest immortal official in Yuhua Heavenly Realm, could not bear. Therefore, Wu Qi and his company arrived at Pangu continent without a hitch. Along the way, with the help of Princess Zhonglu and Wu Qi, it took them less than 5 months to reach the Dian Immortal Pass, which Wu Qi had deliberately chosen, which was about 3 months away from Zhong province. Before Yen Dan, Yingjing, and the other emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties could recover from the shock of the beautiful scenery and the excellent natural conditions on Pangu continent, large groups of human soldiers had already surrounded them from all directions. Spears, halberds, bows, and crossbows were aimed at them, gleaming coldly. A human general strode over, pointed his finger at Wu Qi and his company, and snapped, "They are the rebels of Myriad Immortal Alliance. Kill them all." Muffled bangs kept ringing out as countless arrows rained down from above. Chapter 658. There was no warning or interrogation. Before Wu Qi and his companions could step out of the glowing teleportation formation, the garrison of the human race in Dian Immortal Pass had issued an order to kill them. A total of 3,000 human warriors with cultivation bases had surrounded the teleportation formation where Wu Qi and his companions were. 1,000 spearmen, 1,000 halberd wielders, and the remaining 1,000 were all armed with powerful bows and crossbows specially made by Yu. Any teleportation formation on Pangu continent that led to outer heavenly realms was jointly managed by the Celestial Court and Yu. Especially in an immortal pass like Dian Immortal Pass, which was responsible for the customs, both the Celestial Court and Yu had stationed a large number of soldiers. There were more than 5,000 immortal officials and soldiers of the Celestial Court stationed in Dian Immortal Pass, while Du had an army of 80,000 soldiers stationed here. At the moment, all the teleportation formations in Dian Immortal Pass were guarded by a number of human warriors, while the immortal officials and officials of the Celestial Court were standing on the treetops far away on the mountaintops, pointing and gesticulating. No one tried to stop them. The immortal officials and officials of the Celestial Court were all wearing strange smiles as they watched Wu Qi and his companions being bombarded by thousands of arrows fired from bows and crossbows. Damn it! Wu Qi took a deep breath. He dared not to use his true body of heaven and earth, but had exercised the dragon transformation with all his might. Dragon scales gleaming with a dazzling black light emerged from under his skin, and by the time the first arrow was approaching him, he had transformed into a black dragon that stood on his hind legs. He took a step sideways and stood in front of Princess Zhonglu, shielding Princess Zhonglu with his tall, scaly body that looked extremely strange. Dozens of arrows hit Wu Qi at the same time. Some of them burst into flames, some of them burst into thunderbolts, and a few of them let out shrill ghost howls as they shot out dark smoke, trying to penetrate Wu Qi's body. Some of them even melted when they touched his skin, spraying a greenish venom all over him. The flame could not burn through his dragon scales, and the thunderbolts could not penetrate them. With a casual shake of his body, he unleashed a vast and pure dragon aura that shattered the black smoke that contained an eerie aura of death. But the pale green venom was extremely brutal. Every scale that was attached to the venom was softened piece by piece, and was constantly spraying out large sheets of dark smoke that came with a strange smell of ambergris. The venom had corroded his scales and touched the flesh underneath them. A sharp pain came, and Wu Qi let out a muffled groan. His eyes went wide, and suddenly, a stream of stinking black liquid sprayed out of his mouth. Aobuzan had obtained a great benefit in Myriad Immortal's planet. His cultivation base had recovered to the realm of Gold Immortal, and he had condensed a thread of his bloodline and given it to Wu Qi. Now, Wu Qi could transform into a real black dragon with the divine ability of the Seven Foundation elevating technique. At the same time, he also possessed all the innate divine abilities of the Black Dragon clan. This stream of stinking black liquid was the evil rotting true water, which was the specialty of the Black Dragon clan that Aobuzan belonged to. It was hundreds of times more turbulent than the water spewed out of a high-pressure faucet. The stream of water was as thick as a water tank, and it sent dozens of soldiers who were lunging at Wu Qi flying far away with spears and halberds in their hands. The soldiers were soaked by the black stream of water. They rolled miserably on the ground, looking like ribs that had been stewed in boiling water for a day and a night. Chunks of flesh and blood kept falling off their bodies while thick white smoke billowed out of them. In just the blink of an eye, the soldiers were corroded into skeletons, and their souls were devoured by the black stream of water and melted away without a trace. Lying on top of Wu Qi's head, Aobuzan marveled at the power and purity of Wu Qi's evil rotting true water. Then he opened his mouth and shot out a long tongue, rolling up 7 to 8 soldiers whose cultivation bases had barely reached the realm of Heaven Immortal and swallowing them. He burped lightly and spat out a large amount of clothes, hats, shoes, socks, and bronze half-body armors. The sudden attack had enraged the emperors and courtiers of the 6 states. Although they had learned from Wu Qi what Pangu Continent was like now before they came to Pangu Continent, how could these proud emperors and courtiers of the 6 states, who had always regarded themselves as Lao Tzu's #1 under the heaven, swallow their anger when they were really attacked? Yen Dan gave a cold snort. A great plume of grayish-white energy rushed out from behind him, and the disk of heavenly Tao transmigration rushed out with a muffled noise. The great plume of grayish-white energy transformed into countless arrows and shot out in all directions. Wherever they passed, as long as someone was hit by these arrows, the soldiers would howl and fall to the ground, their souls sucked straight into the disk of heavenly Tao transmigration and crushed them to pieces. Ingjing roared and gave a long roar. Behind him, the shadows of 9 flood dragons soared into the sky. Accompanied by a deafening dragon roar, Ingjing charged into the ranks of Dayu's soldiers like a heavy chariot. With the sword of Qin Emperor in his hand, He would hack a dozen soldiers in half together with their weapons with each swing. From time to time, he would throw out punches with his left hand, each punch like a meteor falling to the ground and stirring up a huge storm. Before the arrows could get close to him, they were knocked away by the energy punches and injured countless human soldiers. Bai Qi, Wang Jian, Meng Ao, Li Xian, Zhang Han, and a group of fierce generals of Qin army followed closely behind Ying Zheng, slaughtering without saying a word. Countless sword beams flashed across the battlefield, and large numbers of DuYu's soldiers were chopped to pieces while howling miserably. Wang Jian, Meng Ao, Zhang Han, and the others were still fine. At most, the soldiers killed by them were chopped into 3 pieces. But those who dared to stand in front of Bai Qi were all chopped into meat paste by the sword beams that shot out from Bai Qi's body. The sky was filled with a mist of blood, and the meat paste and broken limbs were sprayed in all directions, with the furthest distance being several miles away. Bai Qi and his company of killing gods were like a pack of white tigers dashing into a flock of lambs. With just a single charge, they had cut the formation of DuYu's army of 3,000 soldiers in half. In a flurry, a few DuYu's captains wielded their weapons and mobilized their soldiers to encircle and annihilate this group of ferocious monsters. But when the highest-ranking officer among them, the silver medallion colonel, had just given out a few orders, the twang of a bowstring was heard. It was Li Xian who had pulled the bowstring and released an arrow. A bright beam shot out and pierced through the colonel and 18 elite soldiers behind him. The other captains were struck dumb as they watched their superiors slowly fall to the ground with his hand covering the hole in his throat. Before they could figure out how they should deal with this matter, Jing Ke had appeared right next to them like a ghost. A startling beam of light flashed across the sky, as Jing Ke transformed into a blinding beam of light and pierced through the hearts of these captains and their personal guards in a blink of an eye. The beam of light swept across the DuYu's army. Jing Ke had killed 7 DuYu colonels and 38 captains, then returned to Yandan, his body covered in blood. A deep, muffled roar that sounded like the roar of a fiend suddenly rang out. Fan Yuqi, whose body was as sturdy as an iron ingot, together with Lian Pe, Yu Yi, and the other fearsome generals of the 6 states, formed a small formation of arrows and rushed into the formation of DuYu's army from a side. Although there were less than 30 generals in this small assault formation, think about what kind of people they were, right? Apart from the generals of Qin state who were fighting alone, the famous generals of the other 5 states were also in this formation. Which of these men was not a famous general who had killed countless people? Which of them was not a mighty hero who had fought against millions of soldiers? The aura emanating from each of these men was stronger than the aura formed by the formation of 80,000 human soldiers in Dian Immortal Pass. Wherever this small formation went, people were thrown off their feet and horses were thrown off their feet. With just a casual strike from them, several tens of human soldiers would be smashed into pieces. Among these DuYu generals and soldiers, there were many whose cultivation base was even stronger than this group of ferocious gods. However, most of the time, with just a casual stare from Fan Yuqi and the others, they could easily kill these DuYu generals, whose cultivation base was 1, 2, or even 3 or 4 tiers higher than them. In just the time of a few breaths, the 3,000 DuYu generals who besieged Wu Qi and his men were all slaughtered. At this point of time, even the 4 emperors, Tian Wen, Zhao Sheng, Chu Ping, and Wei Wuji, as well as a large number of civilian and military officials around them, did not manage to strike. Broken limbs of 3,000 generals and soldiers were scattered all over the ground, and the ground was covered with sticky blood. The emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties turned a blind eye to it, lifting up their sleeves and wiping the weapons in their hands, talking and laughing as if they were on a field trip. There were several tens of thousands of DuYu soldiers stationed in the vicinity, but none of the people from the 6 dynasties took them seriously. Useless chickens and stray dogs, so weak that they can't even withstand a single blow. But their cultivation base is not bad. If they fall into my hands and are trained for a year, each of them will have the foundation of an elite army. As the man with the most ferocious reputation among all the people present, Bai Qi made a pertinent assessment of these DuYu generals and soldiers while lazily wiping his sword. Their cultivation base was not bad, and many of them were even much stronger than the emperors and ministers of the six dynasties. But as for their fighting prowess, they were just mediocre. In the eyes of Baichi and the others, these Du generals and soldiers who guarded Dian Immortal Pass were just a bunch of little chicks. They did not know what war was and what slaughter was. The cruelty and efficiency of the massacre stunned everyone present. The chief general of Dian Immortal Pass looked stiffly at the broken limbs around Wu Qi and the others, and his body trembled slightly uncontrollably. The eyes of the immortal monarch of the celestial court stationed in Dian Immortal Pass suddenly lit up. He grabbed his subordinates around him and ordered them in a low voice to find out the origin of Wu Qi and the others. If they could be drawn to the celestial court and become officials of the celestial court, that would be the best. The bizarre atmosphere lasted for the time it took to finish a pot of tea. When Wu Qi and the others cleaned up the blood on their bodies and were about to leave Dian Immortal Pass, the general stationed here by Great Yu suddenly pointed at Wu Qi and the others and shouted at the top of his voice, "All rebels of Myriad Immortal Alliance, listen up. Form the Six Gates Immortal Slaughtering Formation and trap and kill them. No, leave a few of them alive. I want to hack them into 1,000 pieces, turn their bones into ashes." Cut, cut, cut. 3 loud roars rang out in a row. Of the 80,000 soldiers stationed in Dian Immortal Pass, tens of thousands of them, except for the 3,000 killed by Wu Qi and the others, sprang into action. In just a few seconds, they had formed a formation around Wu Qi and the others, measuring dozens of miles in circumference. Dozens of large flying ships flew out of a distant valley, surrounded by over 3,000 oracles from the Directorate of Celestials as they approached at high speed. The oracles of the Directorate of Celestials began to recite strange incantations. Countless bone talismans were quickly crushed by them, and a great sheet of bright light sprinkled down as all the soldiers of Great Yu were enchanted with layer after layer of restrictive spells. Amidst the sonorous recitation of the oracles, the eyes of tens of thousands of soldiers turned red, and their morale soared 100-fold. The surrounding natural energy suddenly stagnated, and 6 beams of light pierced into the sky from the center of Dayu's formation, transforming into 6 gates that sealed off the surrounding void. An enormous pressure came from all directions, causing Wu Qi and the others to stiffen instantly and making their movements more difficult. Chapter 659. The Six Gates Immortal Killing Formation was one of the military formations commonly used by the Great Yu Army, and its structure was very similar to that of the Six Flags Gate used by the Immortals. The Six Gates Gate used by the Immortals were divided into different types, such as Illusory Formation, Maze Formation, Trapping Formation, Killing Formation, and so on. But the Six Gates Immortal Killing Formation was different. After being studied and modified by the Great Yu Military Court and the Directorate of Celestials, it was filled with endless variations, countless ambushes, and deadly traps. It was a formation crafted purely for killing. As soon as the formation was completed, the surrounding natural energy was immediately driven away, and even the underground energy veins were forcibly diverted by the power of the formation, avoiding the area 1,000 miles around Dian Immortal Pass. Dian Immortal Pass had become a land of death devoid of natural energy. For the immortals and cultivators who had to rely on natural energy to unleash their strongest power, it was the most disadvantageous battlefield. But the human warriors were not affected by the formation at all. Their strong fleshly bodies allowed them to unleash all their power in the formation. The power of the oracles mostly came from the ghosts and deities they worshipped, or other spirits under the heaven. They borrowed the power of heaven and earth without consuming any natural energy. In the Six Gates Immortal Killing Formation, the overall strength of the human warriors was not affected at all, while the overall strength of the immortals and cultivators was at least halved. When the 6 light screens converged in midair and transformed into a hexagonal column that enveloped the area 100 miles around, Yandan, Yingjing, and the others frowned at the same time. Except for cultivators who purely cultivated their bodies like Baichi and Fanyuchi, The emperors and ministers of the other 6 dynasties had also felt the impact of the disappearance of natural energy. They felt uneasy all over, like fish out of water. Compared to the situation where there was no natural energy in the outside world, the abundant immortal energy in Yandan and the others was gradually spreading out through their skin. Not only was the formation driving away the natural energy in the vicinity, but it was also extracting the magic energy in Yandan and the others. Baiqi snorted coldly. Among all the generals of the 6 states, he was the most murderous. Seeing De Yu's army encircling the human warriors, Baiqi pulled out his long sword, flashed across the air, and dashed straight towards those over 10,000 human warriors in the west, leaving a white beam of light in the air. A strong murderous aura condensed around Baiqi. Suddenly, the shadow of a white tiger rose from behind Baiqi. Accompanied by a terrifying whistling sound, Baiqi rose into the air and slashed down at the army in front of him. As the sword slashed down, dozens of tiger-head-shaped astral swords whizzed out, bringing with them a threatening murderous aura. In the formation, De Yu's soldiers roared out in unison. 300 soldiers with foot-thick bronze shields darted out with large strides. The shields were connected to each other, forming a thick iron defense line in front of Baiqi. These bronze shields were about a foot thick, 10 feet tall, and 5 feet wide. They looked ancient and seemed to be at least thousands of years old. The surface of the cyan shield was engraved with complicated patterns of ghosts and gods. When these patterns were pieced together, they formed a complicated talisman restriction. A deafening boom rang out as Baiqi's astral sword struck the shields. The 300 soldiers gave a muffled snort, their muscles and bones bulging as they staggered backward. Each of the astral swords unleashed by Baiqi weighed more than 1,000,000 kilograms. Even though these soldiers had almost broken through the realm of First Panga Heaven, they were still forced back by Baiqi's sword strike. But that was all they could do. Plumes of green smoke and fire burst out of the shields, which formed a huge ghost head and devoured the astral swords. Although the soldiers were forced back, the astral swords did not hurt them at all. They only felt a sharp pain in their arms. As soon as the 300 soldiers retreated, heavy footsteps could be heard coming from behind. 1,800 soldiers, each holding a defensive shield, lined up in 6 lines of 300 soldiers, marched forward to greet Qiqi. Baiqi's face flickered. He had used all his strength in the strike just now, but he did not smell any blood, which made him feel ashamed. Behind him, another 6 lines of soldiers marched forward. Clearly, his hope of breaking this formation had failed. As a leading general, Baiqi was well aware of how powerful an army could be when they were in formation. If he failed to destroy this formation with his first strike, it would be futile for him to continue attacking. Indignantly, Baiqi spat out a mouthful of saliva and prepared to retreat in a beam of white light. But the 6 Directions Immortals slaying formation was the trump card of the human army stationed in Dian Immortal Pass. Now that Baiqi had broken into it, how could he retreat so easily? But when he was less than 100 feet away, 3 moon oracles standing on a flying ship above him, each with 7 crescent moons embroidered on their sleeves, raised their hands at the same time, and a strange-shaped bone armor in their palms shattered at the same time. Suddenly, the void behind Baiqi rippled like water. Before Ingzheng could warn him, Baiqi had already crashed into the ripple. In the blink of an eye, Baiqi had appeared in the formation of 1,800 soldiers. 1,800 defensive shields formed a small steel fortress around Baiqi. Amidst chuckles, the soldiers who trapped Baiqi pulled out the javelins hidden behind their shields at the same time. Accompanied by the muffled beating of war drums, they raised the javelins with all their strength and threw them fiercely at Baiqi. 1,800 sharp javelins, each as thick as a goose's egg and 6 feet long, shot toward Baiqi at the same time. The overwhelming number of javelins created a sharp, whistling sound, and the situation was like a nightmare. Baiqi roared furiously. He swung his sword and was about to break the javelins when the dozen of human oracles in the sky blew the bone flutes made from the ribs of mermen at the same time. The melodious tune of the flutes drifted down, and Baiqi's arm that was wielding the sword stopped abruptly. Countless illusions appeared before Baiqi's eyes. Mountains of gold and seas of silver, beautiful women, wine, women, and all sorts of other illusions. Baiqi, who had killed countless lives, was confused by those illusions for about a second. Then, Baiqi roared and shattered the illusions with a sky-high intent of killing. He wielded his sword and lunged forward. However, during this brief moment of hesitation, the 1,800 javelins divided into 18 waves and blocked all directions around him. Over 30 javelins in the first wave landed on Baiqi's body simultaneously. Baiqi's body, which had been rushing forward, was sent flying backward by the javelins. Along with ear-piercing noises, the javelins hit Baiqi one after another. The javelins shattered one after another, but at the same time, blood spurted out from Baiqi's body. Different from Wu Qi's true body of heaven and earth scripture or dragon transformation script, although Baiqi was also walking on the path of body cultivator, he paid more attention to the accumulation of killing intent and aura, and entered the Tao through endless killing. Baiqi's fleshly body was not as strong as Wu Qi's. His body was as tough as a diamond, impervious to all kinds of weapons and spears. These javelins were the secret weapons created by Yu. When Baiqi was hit by these javelins, his body could not withstand the attack of all kinds of strange curses attached to them. A muffled groan rang out as Baiqi's left thigh was pierced through by a javelin that moved as fast as lightning. An extremely corrosive and gloomy aura sprayed out from the javelin, and soon, half of Baiqi's thigh was dyed black. In the blink of an eye, the ferocious and brave Baiqi grabbed the javelin and violently pulled it out. Dark blood splashed in all directions. Baiqi staggered a few steps forward and nearly fell to the ground. Clenching his teeth furiously, Baiqi roared furiously, "I'm too ashamed to see anyone today." Mixed with the boundless killing intent, a towering rage transformed into a white tiger with a pair of wings on its back and soared into the sky. Wisps of white light shot out from Baiqi's eyes as he glared at those soldiers who surrounded him and roared, "Die! What are you waiting for? You're going to die soon." The bright gleams flashing on the bodies of 1,800 soldiers shattered at the same time, while all kinds of defensive spells cast on them by oracles were shattered by Baiqi's glare. Suddenly, the soldiers who were holding the shields let out a miserable hiss, as their souls were shattered by Baiqi's glare. Suddenly, countless wisps of white smoke mixed with broken soul fragments rushed out from their 7 apertures, transforming into streams of light that flowed into Baiqi's body. Laughing hideously, the wounds on Baiqi's body healed quickly, and even the piercing wound on his thigh had disappeared in just a short time. Raising his sword, Baiqi taunted the soldiers of Yu, who were slowly approaching from the back. Yingzheng gave a wild laugh, then turned to the emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties and said complacently, "Prince of Wuan is mighty." Ha! Yingzheng was showing off his prowess, while all the ministers of Qin state were grinning from ear to ear. But the faces of the emperors and ministers of the other 5 dynasties were unsightly. Their faces were dark, and they were cursing in their hearts. Why didn't this butcher get smashed into meat paste by the formation? Even though the 6 dynasties had formed an alliance, the emperors and ministers of Zhao state did not have a good impression of Baiqi, especially towards a butcher like Baiqi. Standing off to one side, Wei Wuji ran his fingers through his beautiful swallowtail beard and said coolly, "This formation is divided into 6 gates. Why don't we attack 1 gate each? Let's see who will be the first to break out of the formation. Why don't we bet 3,000 beauties?" The eyes of the emperors and ministers of various dynasties lit up, while Tianwen nodded smilingly and said, 3,000 beauties? That sounds very elegant." Laughing loudly, Tianwen waved his hand and led all the civil and military officials of Qi state to charge toward one of the formations. For a moment, the cries of battle broke out, as the emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties exercised their respective divine abilities and charged toward one of the formations. Betting with beauties? Wu Qi shook his head. He was too lazy to join the battle, as he did not want to snatch the prize. However, Princess Zhang grabbed him and forcefully dragged him toward the formation where the emperors and ministers of Great Yen were attacking. A bright gleam shone from Princess Zhang Li's eyes as she cried out, Husband, each of the 6 dynasties will bet 3,000 beauties. If we are the first to break out of the formation, won't all these beauties belong to us? Princess Zhonglu winked at Wu Qi coquettishly and said with a smile, Zixian has been worrying about choosing concubines for you. 10,000 beauties are more than enough for Zixian to choose the most beautiful and intelligent girl to fill up your mansion. Wu Qi nearly fell to the ground. While Yan Dan and Yan Qijuan cheered at the same time, Zixian is right. Wu Qi, with your latent talent, you have to give birth to more children and grandchildren. Your children and grandchildren are also members of Great Yan's imperial clan. Yan Qijuan even raised a finger and said smilingly, if we win, we'll choose 1,000 best girls from the bet. What do you think? Wu Qi rolled his eyes. He had nothing to say to these people, whose values and morals were completely different from his own. However, Ao Buzan suddenly became extremely excited. He howled and soared into the sky, spitting out the purple inkstone with all his might. 1,000 beauties? I, Ao Buzan, am finally going to get rid of the body of a damned virgin. A purple gleam flashed as the inkstone hit the formation in front of them. Over 10,000 soldiers of Diyu state were smashed to pieces by the inkstone, and the entire 6 gates immortal slaughtering formation collapsed instantly. The formation suffered a backlash, causing tens of thousands of soldiers of Diyu state, Chi-Chi, to cough blood and fall to the ground. Chapter 660. The Purple Heart Inkstone was a treasure personally crafted by Lord Lu. Although it did not possess any sentience, the materials and techniques used to craft it were all precious materials and extremely complicated techniques that could only be used in crafting a primordial artifact. Although it was not a primordial artifact, its offensive strength was enough to put an ordinary gold immortal artifact to shame. The Purple Heart Inkstone shot out of Ao Buzan's little mouth and shot several miles away, trailing a dense purple smoke behind it. By the time it reached the sky above the battle formation, it had turned into a colossal object that measured several miles in circumference and was shrouded in purple smoke. As Ao Buzan gave a dragon cry, the Purple Heart Inkstone plunged whistling down from tens of miles in the sky and smashed onto the battle formation. Tens of thousands of Diyu soldiers were turned into ashes, and the 6 gates immortal slaughtering formation was disintegrated. The backlash had robbed all the soldiers of their ability to fight back, especially those oracles who were the core of the formation. Their fragile bodies suffered from the 9 backlashes when the formation was broken. Over 1,000 oracles exploded into clouds of blood mist in midair. Their souls howled and flew up into the sky, soon turning into nothingness under the sunlight. A few oracles who were attacking with vicious curses were killed by the backlash of the formation, and their souls were immediately devoured by the ghosts and deities they summoned. Vaguely, there were countless fiend shadows looming in the void, and the souls of those oracles were torn to shreds by those fiend shadows. Those who were powerful enough could even hear the greedy chewing noises made by those fiend shadows in the void. Kill, kill, kill. Baichi kept waving his sword and letting out loud battle cries that pierced through the clouds. Led by Baichi, the generals of the 6 states killed tens of thousands of Diyu soldiers as if they were cutting melons and vegetables. Corpses were strewn all over Dian Immortal Pass, while blood flowed and stained the ground. The pungent smell of blood made the faces of the immortal officials and officials of the heaven who were watching from the sidelines pale. The 80,000-strong garrison was wiped out by Wu Qi and a few hundred men. The immortal officials of the celestial court had good eyesight, so they could tell that Baichi and the other emperors and ministers of the 6 states had just stepped into the realm of heaven immortals. But they had wiped out the 80,000-strong garrison of Diyu soldiers, including several hundred generals and oracles whose cultivation bases were as strong as heaven immortals, and the general of Diyu stationed here was an expert of the 7 stars realm of the first Panga heaven. And yet, they were wiped out in such a short time? Although the Inkstone Ao Buzan seemed a little strange, the combat strength of the emperors and ministers of the 6 states seemed to be astonishing. Standing amidst the mountains of corpses and seas of blood with his sword in hand, Baichi was contentedly absorbing the blood and killing aura in the surroundings to improve his strength. The cultivation technique he was cultivating could only make a better and faster breakthrough on the battlefield. The death of tens of thousands of Diyu soldiers had even stimulated the immortal energy in Baichi's body, making him ready to make a breakthrough at any time. A few immortal officials of the Celestial Court cautiously approached Wu Qi and his company. Wang Jian, Li Xian, and the other Deqin generals, who were searching the corpses of Diyu soldiers for valuables, hastily stopped before the immortal officials. Wang Jian, who had a dignified appearance, stretched out his right arm and shouted in a deep voice, "Gentlemen, this road is blocked. Go and do what you are supposed to do. If we can wipe out these Diyu soldiers, we don't mind killing you as well." The killing intent emanating from Wang Jian nearly made the few immortal officials collapse to the ground. They gave Wang Jian a look with trembling bodies, then turned to look in surprise at the emperors and ministers of the 6 states, who were searching the corpses of the soldiers, refusing to let go of even a lower-grade energy stone. Clearing his throat, the leading immortal official mustered up his courage and said in a deep voice, "Fellow Taoists, by the order of immortal monarch Qianhua, the special envoy of the Celestial Court in Dian Immortal Pass, we would like to invite you over for a moment." Looking at Wang Jian, whose face was as dark as still water, the immortal official said in a low voice, "If you are having trouble with your hands, the salary of the Celestial Court is very generous." All the emperors and ministers of the 6 states heard the immortal official's words, but none of them paid him any attention. The salary of the Celestial Court was generous? Bribing them with generous bribes? The emperors of the 5 states, including Ing Zheng, gave the immortal official a fierce look with their bloodshot eyes. Disregarding their dignity as emperors, they stooped down and fished out a few energy stones, spirit herbs, and ores from the belts of a few soldiers. The salary of the Celestial Court was generous? Could it be as generous as the astronomical amount of natural treasures proposed by Wu Qi? This damned black celestial forbidden curse. In order to break this frightening curse that had been haunting Ing Zheng and his men for over 2,000 years, they had to pay a very high price. As the emperors of the 6 states, they had already begun to make money from the dead on the battlefield, and had begun to accumulate their belongings bit by bit, preparing to offer them to Lao Ai in exchange for the freedom of the emperors and ministers of the 6 states, as well as their descendants. So, how could they not be irritated by the fact that the salary of the Celestial Court was generous? If not for their weak overall strength, Ing Zheng and the others would have thought of robbing the great emperors of the Celestial Court. Damn it, the price that Wu Qi gave them was just too frightening. When the eyes of Ing Zheng and the others glared at them with a murderous aura and blood-red gleam, the majesty of an emperor and the frightening killing intent that came rushing at them made them shiver with fear. Without hesitation, they spun and fled. They were a group of murderous men who had gone mad. These immortal officials were experienced and knowledgeable, and what kind of people had they not seen before? Ing Zheng and the others were just as frightening as those fiend immortals who had gone mad in their cultivation and spent all day refining fiend artifacts in piles of corpses. Perhaps, these immortal officials would really attack the subordinates of the Celestial Court stationed in Dian Immortal Pass. They did not want to offend these terrible people. After scaring away the few subordinates of the Celestial Court who wanted to recruit the people, the emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties used the fastest speed to loot all the valuables from the tens of thousands of soldiers, and then stormed into the barracks and administrative center of Diyu in Dian Immortal Pass. All the valuables were taken away, and even the water basin used by General Diyu's pet, a mixed-blood cloud-treading green qilin, was taken away by Qin Weong. The qilin was too extravagant, as the water basin used by it to drink water was actually made from green conch engraving stone. This stone was an excellent material for casting all kinds of cauldrons, and its value was very high. Qin Weong could not be blamed for this. The emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties were now so poor that they were like a swarm of locusts, looting everything wherever they went. After looting the barracks and administrative center of Diyu's garrison, the emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties returned to the square where the teleportation formation in Dian Immortal Pass was located. Behind them was the barracks of De Yu's garrison, and in front of them were the palaces where the immortal officials of the celestial court worked, as well as the pavilions where they usually lived. Be it the barracks of De Yu's garrison or the administrative center, they were all made of huge rocks, and looked dark and not very valuable. But the palaces and pavilions of the immortals were different. The floors were paved with golden bricks, the walls were made of white jade, and the tiles were carved from various beautiful jade. Their pillars were either made of pure gold or pure silver, or all kinds of precious materials such as crystals, corals, and hawksbill turtles. At first glance, the residences of the immortals were luxurious, and filled with an air of wealth. It seems that we still need a lot of natural treasures to completely free the people of the 6 dynasties from that vicious restrictive spell. Chu Ping murmured with a frown while stroking the good-looking little beard on his chin. Yingjing narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "The salary of the celestial court is very high." Wei Wuji's eyes shone with a greedy gleam as he sneered and said, "These people in front of us do not have a strong cultivation base. Judging from their aura, they look like lambs." Zhao Sheng said straightforwardly, "If you want to rob us, just say it." As long as we kill them, who will know that we have robbed here before?" Tian Wen and Yen Dan exchanged a glance, shook their heads, and produced their prime magical treasures without saying a word. The emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties looked at each other and smiled. Then, led by the emperors, hundreds of valiant generals and wise civil ministers, Chi-Chi, produced all kinds of magical treasures and charged aggressively toward the people of the celestial court who were caught off guard. A few breaths later, Baichi came to the forefront proudly. Waving his sword, he cried out, "Let's spread out. Daqin, attack from the front, Great Zhao, outflank them from the back, Great Wei, Great Qi, surround them from the left and right, and Great Yen, prevent them from escaping through the air. My friends from Great Yen, if they escape through the earth, can anyone run faster than you with the Tao of Ghost and Deity?" The emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties roared in unison, and according to Baichi's order, they surrounded the people of the celestial court in Dian Immortal Pass. Daqin, who was charging head-on, possessed an amazing combative strength, and the men of Daqin all had excellent prime magical treasures. The immortals howled and howled miserably, unable to fight back. The men of Great Zhao all had excellent mounts, and they had inherited the tradition of riding and shooting in the past. With just one charge, they had shattered the restrictive spells of the immortals. The men of Great Wei and Great Qi were very strong, and they surrounded the immortals from the left and right, forcing them to flee like rats. Some immortals tried to escape through the air, but Yen Dan's disk of heavenly Tao transmigration hovered high in the sky, killing every immortal who tried to fly up. There was also a beam of light that Jingke had transformed into. No matter what kind of prime immortal artifact you had, you could not withstand his deadly strike. Sun Quan and Han Fei had unleashed a series of marvelous techniques, confusing the immortals who soared into the sky, and soon they were all killed by Great Yan's siege. As for old Mr. MOD, well, he had taken out Mo City, which was 10 times larger, and was now dozens of miles in circumference. As soon as Mo City was out, the immortals went straight underground, and no longer had the courage to take the air route. Unfortunately, the ground was already occupied by millions of ghosts and deities. As soon as the immortals entered the ground, they were surrounded by countless ghosts and deities, never to crawl out again. In just half a quarter of an hour, all the men of the celestial court in Dian Immortal Pass were wiped out, and all the treasures they had plundered in Dian Immortal Pass had become the war trophies of the 6 states. Just as the men of the 6 states were plundering everything in and out of the Immortal Pass, the void suddenly darkened, and then a patch of void shattered. A pitch-black supreme tower, divided into 6 grades from top to bottom, flew out of the shattered void. A shrill whistle rang out, and all the living beings within 10,000 miles of Dian Immortal Pass fell to the ground, unconscious. Wu Qi and the men of the 6 states felt their souls were shaken by the whistle, and they were nearly dragged out of their bodies. Fortunately, they all had powerful treasures with them, especially Yingjing, who had unleashed the Cauldron of You. With all the extraordinary treasures working together, their souls were finally saved. But the strange whistle had still severely wounded them. Even Aobuzan, who was lying on top of Wu Qi's head, coughed out a mouthful of blood despite his cultivation base as a gold immortal. Wu Qi smiled bitterly as he stared at the black supreme tower above him. Why would a supreme high priest suddenly appear here? Chapter 661. The lone, pitch-black supreme tower hovered above everyone's head, and shrill cries that sounded like the cries of apes kept coming out from it. The cries were not sharp, hoarse, soft, or soft. In short, they sounded ordinary, like the cries of a cat that had been starved for 3 days and 3 nights and had its tail stepped on. But these cries, which sounded ordinary, had completely suppressed Wu Qi and his company. The cauldron of Yu was hovering high above Ying Zheng's head, sending out dark waves that swept across all directions. But when they were hit by the cries, the waves burst out and scattered in all directions. If not because Yen Dan and the other few emperors were protected by extraordinary treasures that were not weaker than the cauldron of Yu, just a few cries alone would have killed Wu Qi and his company. Li Exen pulled out the longbow backhandedly, and a pale silver arrow was knocked on the bowstring. His pupils constricted to the size of a needle tip, and his divine will locked onto the supreme tower hovering about 1 mile above his head. Li Exen pulled the bowstring, injecting all his spirit and energy into the arrow. A dazzling silver light burst out from the silver sword, and a faint halo began to ripple and spread out from the arrowhead. Vaguely, there were a few circles of tiny runes spinning rapidly amidst the halo. A burly figure appeared behind Li Exen's back, and the movement of this man was exactly the same as Li Exen. When both of them pulled the bowstring at the same time, their figures merged into one, and the light on the silver arrow became even more blinding. Suddenly, Li Exen loosened his fingers, and the arrow shot straight towards the supreme tower with a shrill whistle. Right after the arrow left the bowstring, the light on it began to shrink rapidly. When the arrow was about to hit the supreme tower, it had turned into a strange black color. All the light along the way was absorbed by the arrow, and the void near the arrow was twisted and distorted. If one looked along the path of the arrow, everything he saw would be twisted. When the arrow was only 3 inches away from hitting the supreme tower, 2 skinny and shriveled fingers appeared silently in front of the arrow. The pitch-black fingers gently pinched, and the arrow, which had gathered all of Li Exen's energy, obediently stopped between the 2 fingers like the most obedient puppy. Suddenly, Wu Qi leaped into the air and gave Li Exen a powerful kick on his buttocks. Li Exen, who had just unleashed the arrow, had depleted all his energy and spirit, and had lost all his strength. He cried out in shock and was sent flying several hundred feet away by the kick. While Ying Zheng and the others were about to scold Wu Qi, a black beam shot over at a rapid speed and brushed past Li Exen's scalp, nearly piercing through his skull. After the shriveled finger caught Li Exen's arrow, the finger flicked, and the arrow bounced back at a speed 10 times faster than when it was shot. If it weren't for Wu Qi kicking Li Exen away, that arrow would have killed Li Exen instantly. Because of Wu Qi's attack, the arrow didn't hit Li Exen. It only shot into the ground with a black light. Everyone's faces turned extremely unsightly when they saw the thumb-sized hole in the ground with their divine sense. With just a casual flick of the 2 shriveled fingers, the arrow shot by Li Exen just now went nearly 3,000 miles into the ground. This was not an ordinary planet like those in outer heavenly realms, but Pengu continent. The rocks here were at least 100 times harder than those in outer heavenly realms. In other words, if it were in outer heavenly realms, the force of a flick of the 2 fingers would be enough to pierce through dozens of ordinary planets. Even Ying Zheng's cauldron of Yu, Yen Dan's disk of heavenly Tao transmigration, and the extraordinary treasures of the other 4 emperors could not withstand the power of the arrow. 6 extraordinary treasures struck at the same time, barely blocking the whistling sound coming out of the supreme tower, and yet, with just a casual flick of his finger, the defense jointly deployed by the 6 emperors was penetrated. This is urgent, and we are in danger. With the scroll in his left hand and the writing brush in his right, Immortal energy surged out of his body as he assumed a fighting stance. Not only Han Exin, but all the emperors and courtiers of the Six States had mustered up all their strength, ready to fight the man in the Supreme Tower with the help of various extraordinary treasures. Wu Qi gave a cold snort and cried out in a low voice, "The overall strength of the Supreme Oracle is strong enough to fight a primordial immortal. How can we be his match? An opponent who could fight a primordial immortal?" As soon as Wu Qi said that, even Ying Zheng, who was the proudest of them all, could not help but turn pale. His body swayed a few times and he almost fell to the ground. Although they were conceited and arrogant, they were not arrogant fools. They all knew very well what kind of existence a primordial immortal was. With their cultivation bases as heaven immortals, challenging a supreme oracle who could fight a primordial immortal was no different from courting death. Even with a spirit treasure like the Cauldron of You, they could not fight a supreme oracle. His words almost destroyed the will of the emperors and courtiers of the Six States. They stared blankly at the pitch-black Supreme Tower, and could not help but feel a sense of powerlessness and weakness. Blue veins were bulging on the back of the hands of Ying Zheng, Yan Dan, and the other emperors, but they could not give any orders. In the face of an absolute gap in strength, whether it was resistance or escape, it was futile. If they acted rashly, they would be laughed at by the enemy. Wu Qi shook his head and sighed faintly. Fortunately, he had long prepared for this, and was prepared for the current situation. Grabbing Ao Buzan from the top of his head, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "It's time for you to play your role. Go now." A few green fiend shadows flickered on Wu Qi's body, while 6 celestial fiend puppets soared whistling into the sky. Grabbing Ao Buzan by the neck, Wu Qi threw Ao Buzan up into the sky like a dead snake. A hoarse and unpleasant laugh was heard coming from the Supreme Tower, mixed with a few violent coughs. "You know I'm a Supreme Oracle, but what else do you want? Why don't you put down all your weapons and magical treasures and surrender? Hee, you can wipe out the garrison army of Dian Immortal Pass in such a short time, which shows that you do have some abilities. Judging from your behavior, you should be the core elites of Myriad Immortal Alliance, right? If you surrender obediently, you might be able to—" Before the man could finish, Ao Buzan and the 6 celestial fiend puppets had soared into the sky, unleashing a bizarre aura right next to the Supreme Tower. In a flash, Ao Buzan's aura broke through from the early-stage Heaven Immortal realm to the realm of Gold Immortal. At the same time, the aura of Wu Qi's puppet soared from the early-stage Heaven Immortal realm, and before long, reached the level of peak-stage Heaven Immortal. A few months ago, Ao Buzan had obtained the enormous energy provided by Lei Meng's blood sacrifice on Myriad Immortal's planet. Therefore, with his previous foundation, he could restore his cultivation base to the realm of Gold Immortal without any difficulty. With Ao Buzan's miraculous innate chaotic dragon body, as long as he held back his aura, the heavenly Tao could not find any trace of him, and thus could not strike down a thunder tribulation to deal with him. Just like Wu Qi, he did not have to worry about the thunder tribulation anymore. But once he took the initiative to unleash his aura of breaking through, it was as if a man covered in black had suddenly poured kerosene on himself in the middle of a dark night, igniting a huge fire. With that, it was impossible for him not to be discovered. As soon as Ao Buzan unleashed his aura, the sky was immediately blanketed with a thick layer of purple-red clouds. Countless thick bolts of lightning could be seen rolling in the clouds, and soon, a huge cloud vortex took shape in the middle of the clouds. As the 6 celestial fiend puppets unleashed their auras, the purple-red clouds abruptly turned dark purple. The bright bolts of lightning were now coated with a pale blood-red color, and with each wave of lightning that flashed across, the ground was painted with a faint layer of blood. The cultivation base of the puppets mainly followed the advancement of Wu Qi's cultivation base. Now that Wu Qi had the overall strength of a peak-level Heaven Immortal, the overall strength of the puppets had gradually caught up with him. Especially after he came to Panga Continent, he had given all the rare ores and energy stones he found to these celestial fiend puppets. As a result, these puppets had gone through a thorough transformation. At this moment, just like Ao Buzan, they had unleashed their aura of breaking through, and the heavenly tribulation they attracted became even more terrifying. The purple-red tribulation clouds of gold immortals immediately turned dark purple, the nirvana tribulation clouds that targeted top-grade gold immortals. Wu Qi chuckled as he tried his best to unleash his aura. Princess Zhonglu rolled her eyes at Wu Qi, then followed suit and unleashed all her aura. An enormous energy wave towered into the sky. Ying Zheng and the others were smart men. When they saw what Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu were doing, they laughed maliciously and unleashed all their aura without reservation. The thunder tribulation of immortals had a very frightening characteristic, and that was the ability to implicate others. When the thunder tribulation descended, only the immortal who was transcending the tribulation could exist within 1,000 miles. If any cultivator or immortal was within this range, the power of the thunder tribulation would increase exponentially. The most vexing thing was that the lightning tribulation was extremely intelligent. It would prioritize killing the strongest cultivators within its range, then kill the weaker immortals and cultivators within its range one by one. When Wu Qi first came to Panga continent, he had used the thunder tribulation to kill an expert who was almost at the realm of gold immortal. Today, he was using Ao Buzan's hand to attract the tribulation, so that he could become Feng Fu again, and use the old trick to teach the old oracle a lesson. Suddenly, countless dazzling green runes burst out from the dark surface of the Supreme Tower, pouring down from the top of the tower like a stream of water. An old, angry, yet horrified voice suddenly rang out. "Shameless juniors, how can you be so shameless? I'm so angry." The intelligence of the thunder tribulation was the strongest. Since the Supreme Oracle was hiding in the Supreme Tower, the thunder tribulation had targeted his body and soul first. The dark purple tribulation cloud changed again. It turned from dark purple to pitch black, and then gradually faded from pitch black to a strange gray. Finally, it turned into a chaotic and tumbling tribulation cloud of gray and white like a pot of porridge. The tribulation cloud had evolved from the ordinary tribulation cloud of gold immortals to the innate divine thunder of yin and yang, which was specially targeted at primordial immortals. It was a terrible thunder tribulation that could pose a fatal threat to even a primordial immortal, and even someone with a primordial immortal item might not be able to survive it. A furious howl rang out from within the Supreme Tower. The void around it shattered with a deafening rumble, and the huge Supreme Tower suddenly vanished without a trace. 99% of the thunder tribulation in the sky had disappeared, and it had already chased after the Supreme Tower. Unless the unlucky Supreme Oracle could destroy the tribulation cloud, the thunder tribulation would always target him like a maggot, and he would not be able to get rid of it even if he could break through the void and flee. Ao Buzan took a deep breath and abruptly retracted his aura, while the 6 celestial fiend puppets quickly hid their auras back into their bodies. Then, Wu Qi waved his hand, and a large sheet of chaotic light enveloped everyone. Using a mystic art of hiding energy, he brought the emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties and fled into the distance at the fastest speed. The tribulation cloud suddenly lost its target. After hesitating for a moment in the sky, the gray and white tribulation cloud trembled, and then countless thunderbolts struck down from it. The Dian Immortal Pass was completely destroyed. Half a month later, a shocking news spread across Diyu. Gao Chengguang, the left minister of Diyu's Directorate of Celestials, was severely wounded by the thunder tribulation, and was forced to abandon his fleshly body to be reincarnated. He did not even have the chance to leave his last words. The human emperor was furious and ordered the whole nation to be mobilized to wipe out myriad immortal alliance. Chapter 662. When the news of Gao Chengguang's death came, Wu Qi and his companions, who had changed their appearances, were on a long journey. Clad in the most common sackcloth of Diyu, Wu Qi and his companions exercised escape arts and headed toward Zhong province. Accompanying Wu Qi and his companions were Yen Dan and the other emperors and ministers of Great Yen. As for Ying Zheng and the other emperors and ministers of the 5 dynasties, they had gone to other places to develop their territories according to the terms of the treaty. According to the treaty, the future strategies of the 6 dynasties would be different, so that there would not be any conflict of interest. In just half a month, when Wu Qi and his companions were still 2.5 months away from Zhong province, the news of Gao Chengguang's death had spread across the entire Diu. Even the secretive itinerant cultivators whom Wu Qi and his companions occasionally met in the wilderness began to discuss the impact of Gao Chengguang's death on the imperial court of Diu. There were even some immortals and itinerant cultivators from Myriad Immortal Alliance who were cursing the bastard who killed Gao Chengguang hysterically. The Gaochen clan was the descendant of the great Emperor Gaochen of the ancient celestial court. The great Emperor Gaochen joined the celestial court as a human and ruled over all the demons under the heaven. He was the strongest figure among the 5 celestial emperors of the celestial court at that time. He had gone through several calamities of heaven and earth, until a terrible calamity destroyed more than half of the celestial court. In order to protect the legacy of the celestial court, the great Emperor Gaochen used a forbidden art to resolve the calamity, but in the end, he himself was turned into ashes. Because of the great Emperor Gaochen, the Gaochen clan had a very good relationship with the celestial court. Those immortals who were saved by the great Emperor Gaochen had now occupied a high position in the celestial court. In the dynasty of Diu, the members of the Gaochen clan, who had inherited the bloodline of the great Emperor Gaochen, were born with the ability to communicate with ghosts and deities, and rule over all the demons under the heaven. In the Directorate of Celestials of Diu, they were a very important power, and even the Yu clan in Liangzhu could not compare to them. Gao Chengguang was not only the left minister of Diyu's Directorate of Celestials, but also the teacher of the current human emperor of Diyu when he was the crown prince. He was also the teacher of the few most powerful princes in Diyu. His cultivation base was profound, and he had a wide circle of friends. In Great Yu, he was a famous minister and powerful minister. Gao Chengguang's daughter was married to the current human emperor, and the current crown prince of Great Yu was Gao Chengguang's grandson. As an important minister of Diyu, Gao Chengguang had secretly left Liangzhu after Myriad Immortal Alliance had stirred up the chaos in the 4 regions of Diyu, and from time to time, he would eliminate powerful figures from the alliance. In just over a year, nearly 100 gold immortals had been killed by him, and the number of heaven immortals and ordinary cultivators was incalculable. However, with Gao Chengguang's identity and status, it would be extremely embarrassing if news of him dealing with these juniors were to spread out. Therefore, Gao Chengguang's movements were very secretive. Every time he struck, he would leave immediately after, and once he succeeded, he would flee hundreds of millions of miles away. Even the Directorate of Celestials of Diyu did not know that their left minister, the father-in-law of the current human emperor, and the current clan leader of the Gaochen clan, had secretly left Liangzhu to join the war. Worst of all, in order to hide his tracks, Gao Chengguang did not use the supreme tower that he had been refining with his blood and sweat. Instead, he secretly took out a spare supreme tower from the storeroom of the Directorate of Celestials. The Supreme Tower was a magical item tailor-made for the Supreme Oracle of Diyu, and was equivalent to a primordial immortal item of a primordial immortal. It was a powerful weapon. Every single brick in the Supreme Tower was refined by the Supreme Oracles with their own blood essence, and every rune was carved with the blood of their own hearts. Therefore, they could synchronize with each other and enhance the combat ability of the Supreme Oracles by dozens of times. It was a giant weapon that could be used both offensively and defensively. As this spare Supreme Tower had not been refined by Gao Chengguang, apart from the most basic function of breaking through the void as a means of transportation, it had almost zero offensive and defensive functions. However, given Gao Chengguang's formidable strength, he did not fight the elders of the Divine Hall head-on. Instead, he stealthily killed the peripheral members of the Myriad Immortal Alliance. He did not need to use the other functions of the Tower of Babel. No one expected that Gao Chengguang would encounter a freak like Wu Qi. Instead of transcending the lightning tribulation after making a breakthrough, he hid the aura of the breakthrough in his body, and when he encountered a strong enemy, he would suddenly release the aura and attract the heavenly tribulation to attack the enemy. Which ordinary immortal would dare to do such a thing? When breaking through a realm, they would release the aura as soon as possible, so that they could attract the heavenly tribulation and transcend it as soon as possible. If they hid the aura in their body and accidentally leaked it when they were cultivating in the future, the heavenly tribulation would come when they could not move at all. Wouldn't that be courting death? It was tantamount to living with a ticking time bomb, and no ordinary immortal would dare to do such a thing. However, Gao Chengguang had encountered top-notch immortals like Wu Qi and Ao Buzan. The heavenly tribulation came one after another, attracting the innate yin-yang division godly thunder, which struck down randomly and smashed the unprepared Gao Chengguang into a pulp. Gao Chengguang dragged his broken body and fled back to Liangzhu City. He didn't even have the time to say his last words, and he didn't even have the chance to take a last glance at his clansmen. He died on the wasteland outside Liangzhu City with his pair of legs popping out. Wu Qi and the rest hurried back to Zhongzhou. Along the way, they encountered itinerant cultivators and immortals discussing this matter. They heard Gao Chengguang's background, where he died, and the various disturbances caused after his death. Wu Qi and the rest could not help but twitch their lips. Was it their bad luck, or was it Gao Chengguang's luck? He was such an important minister, such an extravagant man. Instead of enjoying his life in Liangzhu, he had to wander around and hit people behind their backs. With Gao Chengguang's death, the human emperor was furious, and Diyu had mobilized the whole nation. Countless soldiers who had returned to the countryside had put on their armor again and joined the war. It was true that Myriad Immortal Alliance had encountered a great trouble, but it was bound to become much more difficult for the people of the six dynasties to develop their own power. Originally, Diyu had reserved a lot of power, but with Gao Chengguang's death, it was likely that Diyu would go all out to kill the cultivators and immortals on Pangu continent. They could only hope that Ing Zheng and the others would not be too unlucky to be discovered by the enraged army of Diyu. They did not want to be killed by Diyu's army as soon as they arrived on Pangu continent, thinking that they were the vassals of Myriad Immortal Alliance. Because of the war between Diyu and Myriad Immortal Alliance, cultivators and immortals could not use the official teleportation formations of Diyu. Therefore, Yen Dan and the others could not let Princess Zhongli be kept in her interstitial world, as that would be too disrespectful to Yen Dan and the others. Therefore, Wu Qi and the others could only rely on their own escape arts to travel to Zhongzhou. Dian Immortal Pass was a long way from Zhongzhou, and even with Wu Qi's speed, it would take him 3 months to get there. As for Yen Dan and the others, their speed was not as fast as Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu. It would probably take them a longer time to get there. Along the way, they had witnessed dozens of battles where the Great Yu army encircled and annihilated immortals and itinerant cultivators. Every time, it was Wu Qi who protected them, allowing them to observe the fighting techniques of the Great Yu army up close. Yu Yi, Fan Yuqi, and the other military officers were dismissive of the Great Yu army's command and mobilization. They only felt that the Great Yu army's marching and fighting were extremely rigid. There was no strategy in the battles between the two sides, and it was a head-on fight. After witnessing the battles of the Great Yu army, and learning about Diyu's administration along the way, Yen Dan and the others were full of confidence that Great Yen could gain a foothold on Pangu continent. In their opinion, the administration of Diyu was like a sieve, with countless loopholes that they could use at will. With the shrewdness and sophistication of Yen Dan and the others, they could do whatever they wanted in a country without a household registration management system or a strict monitoring system. Especially now that Diyu and Myriad Immortal Alliance were in a mess, it was perfectly normal for some provinces to have more or less people. Apart from Wu Qi's concern about Gao Chengguang's death, Yen Dan and the others had become ambitious. They were only waiting to arrive at Zhong province, where they could quickly use an Le County and an E County as the base, supplemented by Wu Qi's East Sea County, to quickly expand their territory and invade Pangu continent. But when they were only half a month away from Zhong province, even Jing Ku, who was the most forthright and careless among them, began to notice that something was not right. The frequency of the Great Yu army sightings was getting higher and higher. Previously, they could only see one army of Diyu every 2 or 3 days, but now, they could see 3 to 5 armies of Diyu flying across the sky in flying ships every day. Originally, Strategic forces of Deyu like the supreme oracles rarely appeared in front of people. But now, there was a supreme tower shattering the void and appearing in all directions. After carefully scanning the surroundings with their powerful divine sense, they would suddenly shatter the void and go somewhere else. At the peak, Wu Qi and the others saw 7 different supreme towers appearing in the distant sky in one day. With the power of the sky-reaching tower that could shatter the void, the supreme priests didn't need to rest at all. They could go wherever they wanted. With 3 to 5 supreme oracles, the sky of dozens of first-grade provinces was covered with the shadows of supreme towers. This was not good news. The overall strength of these supreme oracles was so strong that nothing could deceive their eyes. Wu Qi shook his head. It looked like it was not going to be easy for the 6 dynasties to gain a foothold on Pangu continent. What made Wu Qi even more nervous was that both he and Princess Zhonglu had sensed the evil force that kept sweeping across Pangu continent in the void. Every time a wave of force swept across their bodies, Wu Qi's heart would twitch violently. Even Ao Buzan looked worried in the face of the invasion of this force, and he was no longer as lazy and arrogant as usual. It was a curse cast by an almighty expert from the Directorate of Celestials, looking for the suspect who killed Gao Qingguang. If Wu Qi had not used the chaotic energy to erase the remaining aura of the people of the 6 dynasties and erased some of the karmic ties between them and Gao Qingguang, they would have been found by the people from the Directorate of Celestials by now. Wu Qi could only hope that the emperors and courtiers of the other 5 dynasties could keep a low profile. In the face of the furious Deyu dynasty, Wu Qi and the others were still too weak. In the face of such an impenetrable search, a careless mistake could lead to disaster. Wu Qi could not help but fly into a rage out of humiliation. Wasn't it just Gao Qingguang? Did they have to be so nervous? What troubled Wu Qi even more happened. Just as they were about to enter Hai Province, the puppet Wu Qi had left in the East Sea City sent him a warning. Someone had sneaked into the East Sea City and attacked Wu Qi, who was seriously injured and unconscious. The evil flame in Wu Qi's belly exploded in an instant. Chapter 663. Together with the emperor and ministers of Great Yen, Wu Qi met up with the army led by Su Qin and Yen Bugui at the border of East Sea County. Su Qin and Yen Bugui breathed a sigh of relief at the same time when they saw Wu Qi return safely. Over the past few days, the celestial fiend puppet Wu Qi had left in East Sea County, disguised as him, had been attacked 9 times in a row. Poisonous gases, venomous bugs, assassins who sneaked into the bedroom, strange curses, and many other things had implicated and killed more than 3,000 soldiers of East Sea County. Fortunately, the puppet did not have a body of flesh and blood, and it did not have a soul to be attacked. Although the assassins had attacked it 9 times in a row, except for one attack that almost cut it into pieces, the other attacks were all neutralized by Su Qin and his men, who came to the scene after hearing the news. The puppet, which was almost cut into pieces, only swallowed a few hundred kilograms of copper and iron ingots, and its body had basically returned to normal. Su Qin had also brought the puppet over, and Wu Qi had put it back into his body. After a brief discussion with Su Qin and Yen Bugui about the current situation in East Sea County, Wu Qi bade farewell to the emperor and ministers of Great Yen. Princess Zhonglu would follow Yen Dan and the others to Anlu County and an Yi County. Su Qin and Yen Bugui would hand over the control of the 2 counties to Great Yan's imperial court, and Princess Zhonglu would spend some time to gradually release the people of Great Yen from her interstitial world, letting them settle down in Anlu County and an Yi County. The first batch of people to be released would certainly not be the entire population that Great Yen had brought to Pangu continent. At most, it would be several tens of thousands of people. Only when Great Yen had completely taken control of the 2 counties could all the people be gradually released to fill the 2 counties. Not only Great Yen, but also the people of the other 5 dynasties were still sleeping in Princess Zhongli's interstitial world. Apart from a large number of civil and military officials of the 5 dynasties who had been released, the members of the imperial clan were still sleeping in the interstitial world. For a long period of time in the future, Princess Zhonglu would be running around, gradually releasing the people from her interstitial world according to the requirements of the Six Nations. This was a very difficult thing to do, but for the sake of the Six-Nation Alliance, this was the only way. Gazing at Princess Zhonglu and the others who were leaving, Wu Qi turned to look at the dozens of scouting officers standing beside him and said in a flat tone, "Return to the East Sea County. Hey, those assassins caught them alive, but not a single one of them is willing to say who sent them?" A scouting officer cupped his fist and bowed respectfully to Wu Qi, then shook his head helplessly. In the 9 assassination attempts, 7 to 8 of the assassins were captured alive, but all of their souls were tightly sealed with restrictive spells. He had once used a soul-searching technique to interrogate one of the assassins, but the result was that the assassin exploded and died on the spot, nearly dragging Su Qin into it. With a cold snort, Wu Qi turned to Lu Chengfeng and the others who had just been released by Princess Zhonglu, shook his head, and said, "Big brother, brothers, this is the current situation. We are all brothers of the same family, so let's cut to the chase. The affairs of East Sea City and even East Sea County must be handled quickly." Lu Chengfeng nodded, then cupped his fist and said to Wu Qi with a smile, "Of course. This is the foundation of US brothers, and we must take care of it wholeheartedly." Looking around at the vast and boundless wilderness, Lu Chengfeng breathed out a long sigh and said, "When you and I were in Little Meng City in the past, we never thought that we would have such an opportunity today. In such a vast world, we have a bright future ahead of us." At Wu Qi's order, the 100,000 iron-armored soldiers released by Princess Zhonglu from Chi-Chi's interstitial world let out a loud cry. Together, Wu Qi and Ao Buzan rolled up a gust of strong wind, and a dark cloud rose from the ground. The 100,000 elite soldiers, who had been trained by Lu Chengfeng, Zhang Hu, and the others over the years, rose into the air and flew toward East Sea City. These 100,000 soldiers were the elites that Great Yen had carefully trained over the years. Since Yen Bugui and the others sent the true body of heaven and earth scripture and other cultivation techniques of the human race back to Great Yen had recruited a large number of soldiers and began to cultivate the cultivation techniques of the human race. These 100,000 elite soldiers were the best of the best, and because they were trained by Lu Chengfeng and the others, there was absolutely no problem in their loyalty. Among these soldiers, the strongest could already fight against nascent soul cultivators, and the weakest could fight against Jindan cultivators. Although their cultivation bases were a little too weak on Pangu continent, they were on Pangu continent, and their cultivation bases would definitely grow very quickly. Especially when Wu Qi could exchange a large number of blood sacrifices with Lei Meng in exchange for power, he did not have to worry about the cultivation bases of these soldiers. With 100,000 Xiong Pai in hand, together with a group of capable officials brought by Lu Chengfeng and the others, Wu Qi's administrative, military, penal, and civil affairs framework of East Sea County was finally complete. As long as Wu Qi kept transferring resources to East Sea County, together with the hundreds of millions of Great Yan's people in Princess Zhongli's reserve, the future development of East Sea County would surely reach a climax. With Ao Buzan, the freshly minted true dragon of Gold Immortal Realm, a 10,000 miles long gust of wind blew the dark clouds and rushed toward East Sea City. After spending more than 20 hours on the road, the East Sea City came into sight. In the farmlands outside the city, countless farmers were meticulously tending to the crops in the fields. A gentle breeze blew across the fields, and waves of green waves reflected a little bit of green light under the sunlight. Far in the distance, thousands of white sails were gliding across the smooth surface of the ocean. Large trawls made by Su Qin were being pulled by fishing boats and scooped up a large number of fishes. When Wu Qi and his company were flying across the ocean, they happened to see a large fish being pulled up, and the joyful laughter of fishermen could be heard echoing across the ocean. Between the plains and the sea, on the mountains that surrounded the East Sea City like arms, some herb gatherers and hunters were roaming in the woods. Occasionally, a powerful wild beast would pounce on them and attack them. The well-trained soldiers of Donghai City would raise their iron shields and spears and charge forward. These beasts that ordinary people couldn't deal with were killed on the spot. These beasts already had the aura of demonic beasts, but they still possessed the aura of demonic beasts. Controlling the dark clouds, Ao Buzan circled the East Sea city a few times. Lu Qingfeng and the others could not help but laugh happily as they looked down at the lively cities and villages below. This was a good place, 100% good place. Everything was so pleasing to the eye, and everything made one feel comfortable. Even the wind blowing from the surface of the sea, which carried the fishy smell of the sea, was full of vitality and abundant energy. Everything here had a primitive and simple feeling, just like a piece of unpolished jade, waiting for Lu Qingfeng and his companions to study and carve it. Seeing the satisfied smile on Lu Qingfeng and the others' faces, Wu Qi nodded delightedly as well. Patriarch Jiang Yun and the other immortals who had submitted to Wu Qi, who had been silent all this while, finally smiled. There was no need to deliberately search for energy veins or caves, and no need to build a cave abode. Any place on Pangu continent had more natural energy than Myriad Immortals' planet. This was a good place for cultivation, a real blessed land. It was hard to imagine how rich the natural energy would be if they could find a good cave abode here and communicate with a few underground energy veins to attract natural energy. Wu Qi scanned the mountains in the distance with his divine sense, and found that the mountains were filled with powerful energy ripples. Clearly, they were filled with all kinds of spirit herbs. When he looked at the mountains in the distance with his Dharma eyes, he saw 5 colored beams of light shooting up into the sky from under the sand. He could tell that the reserves of various ores in the mountains were extremely rich, thousands, even tens of thousands of times richer than Myriad Immortals' planet. Pangu continent is indeed a good place. Patriarch Jiang Yun stroked his beard and smiled, while Taoist Qing Xan and the others kept nodding and praising. All of them were taking deep breaths and laughing happily. The disciples of White Cloud Immortal Sect and Tranquil Vimla Sect were smiling brightly as well. Some of the disciples with lower seniority and cultivation base were so dizzy that they could barely stand straight. The concentration of natural energy here was so strong that they were intoxicated by it. Smiling, Wu Qi said to Patriarch Jiang Yun, "Patriarch, let's settle down the army of 100,000 soldiers first. After that, I'll accompany the few patriarchs to choose a blessed land to build a cave abode. The few patriarchs are the revered elders of Underhand Sect, and I'll have to rely on them for many things in the future." Patriarch Jiang Yun and the other old immortals nodded happily, while the disciples of both sects were overjoyed. They had encountered a really good thing this time. After 2 days of busy work, Wu Qi finally settled down the people he brought with him. 100,000 soldiers were stationed in 4 camps in the East Sea City, each under the command of Meng Xiaobai, Luo Kadi, and a few others. Lu Qingfeng became the highest administrative officer in East Sea County, apart from Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu. He had the final say in all the affairs of the military court, Directorate of Celestials, Agriculture Court, Priest Court, and many other institutions. Lu Ziyuan and a large number of Lu Qingfeng's trusted subordinates had filled all the departments in East Sea County, and the administrative efficiency of East Sea County was immediately raised by more than 100 times. Meanwhile, Patriarch Jiang Yun and the other 2 ancestral masters and their disciples had built a cave abode in a smoky mountain about 10,000 miles west of East Sea City. 1,000 boys with excellent spirit roots and aptitudes were carefully selected from all over the East Sea County by Wu Qi. The abundant natural energy, endless cultivation resources, and the large number of new disciples had made Patriarch Jiang Yun and the others overjoyed, making them dance with joy. Waning Dragon King, who had left Myriad Immortals' planet with Wu Qi, was delighted to meet his son here. Together with a few old dragon kings and many aquatic demons, as well as Lord Xianxing, Catfish Flood Dragon, and many others, they had built a city in the ocean near East Sea County, preparing to build a magnificent crystal palace. Driven by his wicked sense of humor, Wu Qi had named the Crystal Palace the Dragon Palace of East Sea. Driven by Wu Qi's wicked sense of humor, Waning Dragon King had changed his name to Ao Guang, the Dragon King of East Sea. Finally, after arranging the people of Meng Village to stay in the most fertile valley outside East Sea City, Wu Qi finally had the time to visit the few assassins who were captured alive in the dungeon of the city. In a dark and damp dungeon, on top of a cross made of black stone, a few skinny, fierce-looking men were chained to the cross, naked. They were the unlucky men who had tried to assassinate Wu Qi 9 times in a row, but failed in the end. But they did not know that what they were trying to assassinate was not Wu Qi himself, but the celestial fiend puppets Wu Qi had left in East Sea County. Slowly, Wu Qi came before these assassins, frowning as he studied their naked bodies. "Tell me, who asked you to assassinate me?" Wu Qi was a little angry as he cried out, "You should know that I've always been seriously wounded, lying in bed and unable to move. Yet you still want to assassinate me? Who has such a deep grudge against me?" The few assassins turned to look at Wu Qi. A mysterious smile appeared on their faces, and suddenly, their bodies began to swell up. Boom, boom. A few loud booms rang out, and the dungeon, which occupied an area of nearly 100 acres, collapsed. Chapter 664. Without giving Wu Qi any chance to ask questions, the few assassins immediately detonated their fleshly bodies the moment they saw Wu Qi. Their souls turned into countless wisps of dark green smoke that could be seen with naked eyes and shot out in all directions, interweaving into a huge net that enveloped Wu Qi and the others. Vaguely, shrill and unpleasant ghost howls could be heard coming out of the net. No one knew how many evil ghosts the attack had attracted. The 100-acre dungeon collapsed. Wu Qi pointed his fingers in the air and produced primordial runes that flowed like water, which transformed into a pitch-black, bell-shaped restrictive barrier that protected everyone from the terrible explosion. When the shock waves of the explosion gradually subsided, he brought everyone out of the ground. The dungeon, which was originally deep underground, had turned into a huge pit that measured about 100 acres in circumference and hundreds of feet deep. The bodies of these assassins exploded, and their blood and flesh melted into a sticky stream of venom. Even the rocks and soil on the ground were corroded by the venom and turned into smoke, slowly rising into the air. That sizzling noise sounded like countless silkworms swallowing leaves, which could make anyone's hair stand straight up. Men of death? Wu Qi flew back to the ground with everyone. Gritting his teeth, he stared at the completely destroyed dungeon, then waved his hand and ordered Huang Liang to summon the civil servants to backfill the pit. Before that, he also needed to get some antidotes from the Directorate of Celestials and sprinkle them into the pit to neutralize the poison. Needless to say, who else but Yu Miao could have such a deep grudge against Wu Qi that he would send assassins of death and use such a vicious method to kill Wu Qi? Wu Qi had been involved in the power struggle between the Yu clan of Zhong Province and the Yu clan of Liangzhu. Although he was just an insignificant character in this matter, how could Yu Miao, who felt that he had lost face and been thrown into confusion, let go of Wu Qi? This assassination might just be the vanguard of the countless assassinations that would follow. With the viciousness and cruelty of Yu Miao's curses, and the fact that the venom from the bodies of these assassins contained some other evil tricks, it was very likely that this piece of land could no longer be used in the future. Wu Qi's intuition told him that the venom would turn this piece of land into a land of death. It might not be a barren land, but he could not expect this piece of land to be rich in water, grass, and livestock in the future. Men of sacrifice? Lu Qingfeng laughed eerily. So, there are people on Panga continent who raise men of sacrifice? Hee, I really want to see who is stronger between their men of sacrifice and the assassins of Great Yen. Wu Qi's eyes lit up. He thought of the assassins he and Lu Qingfeng had met in Great Yen, who had no fear of death, who did not care about their own lives or the lives of others, and who were cruel, evil, cunning, and ferocious. Wu Qi immediately assigned the task to Lu Qingfeng, asking him to contact Princess Zhonglu as soon as possible, asking Princess Zhonglu to provide some feasible and vicious methods, and asking Lu Qingfeng to select a batch of assassins immediately. Assassinations? Wu Qi could not help but grin coldly. How many sons and grandsons do you have who can withstand the endless assassins sent by Wu Qi? If you want to play, I'll play with you. Wu Qi clenched his jaw and made up his mind. While the East Sea City was dealing with the trouble caused by the desperate assassins, a few guards from the county governor mansion arrived in a hurry. The prefecture overseer of High Province, Yu Miao, had arrived at the county governor mansion of East Sea with a group of attendants and had asked to see Wu Qi. The person who brought the guards to see Wu Qi was Yan Feiyu, a minor civil servant brought by Lu Qingfeng. These civil servants trained by Lu Qingfeng were very perceptive. Yan Feiyu told Wu Qi respectfully that Yu Miao's face was unsightly and that there were a few middle-aged men around him who seemed to be very rude to Yu Miao. It seemed that Yu Miao was being suppressed by them. As the supervisor of the county governor mansion, Yan Feiyu was responsible for greeting visitors, serving tea, guarding the door, and arranging guards. Just now, he had taken the opportunity of asking the maidservants to serve tea to observe the relationship between Yu Miao and the few middle-aged men. When Yu Miao asked about Wu Qi's current situation, he seemed very concerned and even a little worried. But the tones of the few middle-aged men were unpleasant. Judging from their gloating tone, it seemed that they could not wait for Wu Qi to die as soon as possible. Before one wave had subsided, another wave had arisen. Wu Qi sneered and nodded at Lu Qingfeng. Lu Qingfeng then left to deal with the various affairs in East Sea City, while Wu Qi brought hundreds of guards who practiced the true body of heaven and earth scripture and rode a tall horse to the county governor mansion. In De Yu's usual style, a snake-shaped flying ship and a scorpion-shaped flying ship were hovering side by side over the county governor mansion, about 3 miles above the ground. The snake-shaped flying ship was Yu Miao's ride, so Wu Qi was naturally familiar with it. But the flying ship, which looked like a scorpion with 4 wings on its back, gave off a ghastly evil air. The black scorpion-shaped flying ship was covered with a layer of unknown scales, which should have been removed from some kind of serpent. The head of the ship was round, and there was a faint green gleam flickering in the scorpion-shaped mouthpiece, which should be the nozzle of some powerful weapon. On the other hand, a barb shaped like a scorpion's tail was poking out from the back of the ship. It was about 10 feet in diameter and glinted with a pale green gleam, while several dozens of bizarre runes could be vaguely seen flashing on its sharp tip. Even from such a long distance, Wu Qi could smell the fishy smell coming out from the tip. Calmly scanning the ship with his divine will, Wu Qi was shocked to find that the flying ship was actually made from the shell of a giant scorpion, about 3 miles long. According to the Scroll of Stealing, there was only one kind of giant scorpion, the green-tailed scarlet heart scorpion. It was a vicious creature whose venom could destroy the soul of even a gold immortal. In other words, this scorpion could fight against a gold immortal, and one could easily imagine the cost of making it into a flying ship. Compared to this flying ship, Yu Miao's snake-shaped flying ship was like a shabby 3-wheeled motorcycle parked next to a luxury limousine. Without batting an eyelid, Wu Qi dismounted in front of the county governor's mansion and walked into the mansion with a large group of guards. In the main hall of the mansion, Yu He, with a gloomy face, was staring blankly with a teacup in his hand. The tea had cooled, but he did not move at all. A few other middle-aged men dressed in coarse black robes were sitting on the large stone chairs in the main hall, leisurely tasting the tea that had been brewed into plain water. Standing next to Yu He were 6 moon oracles, and the sleeves of the few middle-aged men were embroidered with at least 7 crescent moons, while the dozen or so oracles standing behind them had more than 4 crescent moons embroidered on their sleeves. Obviously, the leader of the group was a middle-aged man who wore 3 dark green jade rings on his fingers. He had a square face, and his skin was fair like the finest jade. 9 crescent moons were embroidered on his sleeves, and they were all embroidered with golden threads. Clearly, he was a formidable expert who could break through the realm of sun and step into the realm of gold immortal at any time. The sound of footsteps rang out as Wu Qi walked slowly into the hall. He left all the guards outside the hall, and walked into the hall with a calm and composed expression. Smiling and bowing to Yu He, Wu Qi said slowly, "Elder brother Yu Miao, am in the middle of a war with myriad immortal alliance. How did you find the time to come here? Tan Lang is useless. He was wounded by a few fiend immortals last time. After recuperating for so long, he has just fully recovered." When Yu He saw Wu Qi come in, he quickly put down his teacup and bowed to Wu Qi. When he heard Wu Qi say that he had fully recovered, he could not hide the joy that had welled up in his heart. Before he could say anything, he burst out laughing. He came up to Wu Qi excitedly, took Wu Qi's hand, and said, "Wonderful! Have you really recovered?" "I've been so busy these past few months that I didn't have time to visit you in East Sea County. Have you really recovered?" Grinning coldly, Wu Qi gave the few middle-aged men a sidelong glance and said coolly, "Of course I've recovered. Otherwise, why would there be assassins coming to me? A while ago, I had just devoured the hundreds of millions of evil spirits that rushed into my head, and just as my overall strength had taken a big step forward, some assassins came knocking on my door. What a pity! I've captured them alive, and they even said that Elder Yu Miao sent them to kill me." As soon as Wu Qi said that, Yu Miao's face froze abruptly. The middle-aged man with a dignified appearance raised his brows, rose to his feet slowly, and said with a cold grin, "Tan Lang, don't talk nonsense. You can't implicate my father in such groundless things." The corner of Wu Qi's mouth twitched as he raised his chin at the man and asked coolly, "Who is this?" Yu Miao grinned darkly, clasping his hands behind his back as he looked at the man and said, "Elder Yu Miao's son, my uncle, Yu Lei. I'm here because someone complained to Prefecture Overseer Bo, saying that our Yu clan has placed a cripple, who is seriously injured and has his soul devoured, as the lord of a county, which occupies more than 30% of the land in Hai Province. He, Elder Yu Miao sent Uncle Yu Lei here." Wu Qi nodded as if he was suddenly enlightened. "If I'm still seriously injured, or if I've been killed by the assassins, His Excellency Yu Lei will become the new county governor of East Sea, right? What a pity. I was able to get out of bed 2 months ago, and I've been feeling better these days. Those assassins have also confessed that Elder Yu Miao sent them to kill me. What should I do now?" Yu He scolded hypocritically, "Tan Lang, Elder Yu Miao sent someone to assassinate you, but he needs evidence." Wu Qi grinned and clasped his hands behind his back, not saying a word. Yu Lei's expression flickered slightly. Looking at Wu Qi, who was alive and kicking without any sign of injury, he shook his head thoughtfully. After sizing up Wu Qi for a long time, Yu He smiled faintly and said, "Well, since General Tan Lang is safe and sound, it's easy to get back to Prefecture Overseer. General Tan Lang is in good health, so I'm sure he can take good care of East Sea County." As he spoke, Yu Lei suddenly stretched out his right hand and thrust it toward Wu Qi like the poisonous tail of a scorpion. A shrill whistle rang out as a beam of green light shot straight toward Wu Qi's forehead. Wu Qi gave a cold snort as a plume of black mist sprayed out of his body, amidst which could be vaguely seen flashing with bolts of lightning. Without hesitation, he performed an incantation gesture, and 13 bolts of lightning, each as thick as a bowl, shot whistling out of the mist in a row, shattering the green light and heading straight toward Yu Miao's face. Yu Lei laughed and a large amount of green mist with a fishy stench surged out from his body, dispersing the lightning. After that, he led the large group of attendants around him and left without saying a word. In the blink of an eye, he had walked out of the hall. They flew up and entered the scorpion-shaped flying boat. Not long after, the flying boat disappeared without a trace. After a full quarter of an hour, a faint cold snort was heard coming from the horizon. Cultivating both fleshly body and magic? You do live up to your reputation. Tan Lang? Yu Lei will remember you. Chapter 665. On the golden sand, the sound of drumming could be heard. A large group of strong and handsome girls danced merrily on the beach, their bodies red against the bonfire, making them look like flaming fairies who had descended to the mortal world. Whole cows, sheep, little whales, and skewers of chickens, ducks, and geese were being roasted over the bonfire, their bodies dripping with oil. A strong aroma drifted far away with the sea breeze, and the sound of laughter drowned out the sound of the tide. A curtain measuring 1,000 feet in both length and width was formed by black brocade, and Wu Qi and Yu He were sitting behind it with their attendants, drinking and having fun. Wu Qi's attendants and personal guards were all burly men, Each of them had a burly body, and each of them was a tough man who could overturn a mountain with just one punch. As for Yuhi's attendants, more than 90% of them were skinny oracles who looked like they could be blown away by a gust of wind. The oracles brought here by Yuhi now had pale faces, and were racking their brains to think of a way to avoid the toasts of these burly men around Wuqi. Some of the rough-looking men, such as the few hunters from Meng village, had already pinned a few oracles to the ground, forcing their mouths open and pouring wine into their mouths with wine jars. The few poor moon oracles, who could fight against heaven immortals, were like little chicks being beaten by a rainstorm before the violence of these burly men. They could not fight back at all, and were almost killed by the strong liquor they poured into their bodies. When these oracles were knocked out, the dancing girls rushed up and carried them to a small tent next to the curtain. Before long, the moans and gasps of girls could be heard. Wu Qi and Yuhi looked at each other and grinned. The obscenity in their eyes made one wish that a bolt of lightning would fall from the sky and strike them to death. Yuhi was very satisfied with Wu Qi's hospitality. In his opinion, Wu Qi's arrangements were very thoughtful. The one-stop service of eating, drinking, and having fun was too warm. The wine and delicacies served were the best, and the men who served them were very enthusiastic. Although they were a little too enthusiastic, the dancing girls were really young and lovely. Even Yu Mu himself had taken a fancy to a few girls with very long legs and fair skin. He was already a little restless. If it weren't for Wu Qi urging him to drink, he would have already rushed up to those girls. On the other hand, Wu Qi was very satisfied with the human race that Yu Miao had sent to him. Unlike the warriors who cultivated the true body of heaven and earth scripture, the priests of De Yu were a scarce resource. Although the armies of Zhong province were usually accompanied by tens of thousands of oracles when they went to war, the number of official oracles in the entire Directorate of Celestials of Zhong province, including the Directorate of Celestials of the 300 provinces under its jurisdiction, did not exceed 500,000 people, excluding those apprentice oracles, who could have the patterns of stars, moon, and sun tattooed on their sleeves. Moreover, priestesses were different from ordinary warriors. Those warriors would retire once they reached the age limit, but priestesses were a lifelong profession. The total number of retired veterans and serving soldiers in Zhong province was definitely over 10 million, but there were only a little over 500,000 priestesses in the entire province. Pangu continent was not short of warriors. As long as they were men with a strong body and full of blood and energy, they were all good candidates for cultivating the true body of heaven and earth scripture. But what the oracles of Directorate of Celestials needed was not a strong body, but an innate power that allowed them to communicate with ghosts and gods. And this innate power was mostly inherited in the bloodline, just like the power of the ancient god that Princess Zhonglu inherited from her mother. If Wu Qi wanted to make a living on Pangu continent, how could there be no oracles in his East Sea County? But now, the oracles of Directorate of Celestials in East Sea County were the 2 or 3 cats assigned to him by Yu Miao, and they were all the direct descendants of Yu clan, so there was no way they would be loyal to Wu Qi. Therefore, taking the opportunity of Yu Miao bringing a large number of oracles to East Sea County, Wu Qi shamelessly recruited beautiful girls to borrow his seed. Yu Miao had brought hundreds of oracles with him, and Wu Qi had recruited 8,000 beautiful girls from the common people with a huge sum of money. And, according to Wu Qi's knowledge of physiology and hygiene, these girls were all pregnant in the past 2 days, and once they intercourse with a man, they were likely to get pregnant. The clothes of the dancing girls were specially designed by Wu Qi, short hot pants and short shirts that barely covered their breasts, exposing large areas of their fair skin. Coupled with the stimulation of the bonfire and liquor, they would definitely turn Yu Miao and those oracles from sanctimonious oracles into beasts in heat worse than beasts. There were only hundreds of girls dancing around the bonfire, but in the woods near the curtain, there were thousands more waiting to have sex with these oracles. Wu Qi promised these girls that as long as their children had the aptitude to become oracles, these girls and their families would be supported by East Sea County, and their children would become lofty oracles. Wu Qi had underestimated the people of Pangu continent's yearning for the mysterious, powerful, noble, and dignified profession of oracles. The 8,000 girls were all recruited without any effort, and under Wu Qi's strategy, they would squeeze Yu Miao and the hundreds of oracles dry. Wu Qi was very satisfied with the brilliant idea he had come up with, and he was even more satisfied with Lu Qingfeng's efficiency. Yu Miao and the others arrived in East Sea County at noon, but by dusk, the 8,000 girls were already ready, and all the preparations for the bonfire party were ready. They had even added some herbal juice to the liquor, which was suitable for aphrodisiac and could squeeze out the energy of men. 2 hours later, all the oracles Yu Miao brought with him had disappeared, and the sound of banging and moaning could be heard coming from the small tents near the curtain. After being pulled up by the ear by Wu Qi and forced down 2 jars of liquor, Yu Miao was escorted into one of the tents by more than 20 girls in a daze. With a faint smile on his face, Wu Qi stood in the middle of the curtain and quietly cast a strange magic, the hasten spell. It was a mystic magic that the ancient clans cast when they were having sex in order to multiply their population. It was invented by some bored innate gods in ancient times, and its only effect was to enhance the libido of men and increase the chance of pregnancy of women. A faint pink mist enveloped the whole beach, and the strange noises coming from the tents suddenly became very loud. The 8,000 carefully selected girls were all in their menstrual period, and coupled with the effect of the hemorrhagic curse, Wu Qi had no doubt that in a few months, Donghai County would have 8,000 pregnant women with big bellies. In a few years, the East Sea County would have at least thousands of children who had the aptitude to become oracles. If they were brainwashed and educated from an early age and carefully trained by Princess Zhang Lu, an expert who was proficient in the great Tao of ancient gods, East Sea County would no longer have to worry about the lack of oracles. Chickens give birth to eggs, and eggs give birth to chickens. Chickens, eggs, and eggs are endless. Standing with his hands clasped behind his back and listening to the subtle noises coming from the small tents, Wu Qi breathed a deep sigh and said, "It's not easy for me to run a territory. Pimping 8,000 people at once? I dare not say it will never happen again since ancient times, but it is an unprecedented feat." Shaking his head, Wu Qi gave a cold snort. If not for the lack of population in his territory, Wu Qi could really get tens of thousands of people to plant his seeds. If not for the fear that he would not be able to explain to Yu Miao if he killed some of them, Wu Qi would also get hundreds of women from the Longbow Kingdom, whom he had placed in a secret ancient cave to recuperate. Unfortunately, the bodies of these oracles were as fragile as reeds. If those women from Longbow Kingdom were to get excited and accidentally use a little bit of strength, they might really lose their lives. Sighing with emotion, Wu Qi stood in the tent from the wee hours of the morning, then noon, and afternoon. It was not until the evening of the next day that Yu Miao finally staggered out of the tent with the help of a few girls. Yu Miao, who was once handsome and elegant, now had his face turned blue, and his eye sockets were pitch black, making him look like a panda. His back was hunched and his body trembled as he walked out of the tent. His lips were sunken, and he looked as if he had lost a lot of weight. Before long, the curtains of the tents were lifted, and all the oracles had to be supported by the girls to get out. These poor oracles were very weak to begin with, and after 12 to 14 hours of hard work, they felt as if their brains and other bodily fluids had been completely squeezed dry. "What a passionate man. He said to Wu Qi with a trembling voice, "Brother, I'm leaving now. You are too passionate, and they are too passionate. If I don't leave now, I'm afraid I won't be able to. Why, you must be careful of that old bastard, Yu Miao. He is not a man who is easy to talk to." After giving Wu Qi a few words of advice, Yu Miao swallowed and glanced greedily at the girls around him, who were staggering as well. Suddenly he shuddered. Not daring to look at these beautiful girls any longer, he gritted his teeth and said, "Last night was really absurd. Brother, the girls in your territory are really too passionate. Fortunately, I still have some foundation, or else I wouldn't be able to stand up today." The oracles brought here by Yu Miao were also looking at the girls around them with complicated expressions. Last night, they had experienced the feeling of going straight from heaven to hell. At first, they were so happy that they felt like they were in heaven, but in the end, The feeling of having their bones scraped and their marrow sucked made them feel like they were in hell. But hell was so depressing that they had lost their minds and gone crazy. They did whatever the girls wanted, and even took the initiative to invade and violate. The legs of these oracles were weak, and they had no strength at all. But, as Yu Miao had said, Wu Qi was too passionate, and the girls in his territory were too passionate. The bewildering scene of 8,000 girls attacking about 600 oracles had left these oracles with blank memories, and they could not remember what had happened from last night to now. But it was so enjoyable that they felt like they were flying into the clouds. General Tan Lang, the county governor of East Sea, is such a good man. Yu Mu, as well as the oracles he brought here, were all filled with deep gratitude to Wu Qi, but they could not help but be traumatized by the girls in his territory. It was so terrible that many of them almost died last night. Naturally, Wu Qi was reluctant to part with Yu Miao. He packed half of the local specialties of the flying ship for Yu Miao, picked a few beautiful girls, and sent them to the ship. Only then did he wave goodbye to Yu Miao. Wu Qi promised that when he straightened out the backlog of affairs in East Sea County, he would immediately lead an army to fight against the people of Myriad Immortal Alliance. At the same time, he reminded Yu Miao to be careful of Yu Miao's sneak attack. After a long time of busying himself and seeing Yu Miao and his companions off, Wu Qi's face suddenly darkened. He immediately returned to the county governor's mansion and summoned all the high-ranking officials around him. He wanted to retaliate against Yu Miao with the cruelest means. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.